Broadcasting under the night sky from the edge of an undisclosed jungle on the Gulf of Mexico, I'm Christopher Garitano, your voice in the night. For the next hour, allow me to be your guide into the bizarre unknown, the fantastic macabre, and together we'll journey to that borderland between fiction and reality, a place beyond all rational explanation. We are now off to the witch. Robert Leroy Johnson. He was one of the most influential guitar players in rock and roll history. Johnson's eternal story is primed by an incredible legend. It's said that at one time he was a young musician with no considerable skill, and then made a deal with the devil himself after a mysterious meeting on a Mississippi plantation crossroads. Most of Johnson's fame came posthumously, and even early blues musicians of the day swear that the story is true. Were there musicians and artists throughout history that sold their souls for fame and fortune? Tonight's guest is a guitar player who may have had a similar encounter with the devilish deal. We'll hear his story after this commercial break.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
You are listening to the Off to the Witch podcast, where we explore that bizarre borderline between fiction and reality and all subjects arcane. Journey over to my YouTube channel and subscribe now at youtube.com/@offtothewitch for a variety of extras and special features, including the Off to the Witch mini docs with further insights on many of the latest episodes, as well as previews and behind the scenes of my forthcoming investigative series, Off to the Witch Presents, as well as the anniversary edition of my motion picture documentary, Montauk Chronicles. And follow us on social media. All links are available at linktree.com/Garitano7, Garetano7, and stay tuned for more Off to the Witch.
I will destroy you, all of you. You kids will be my instrument.
Hates it more like it. We've got to get out of here.
I don't believe it. Yes, you can believe it.
And now on NBC Saturday Night at the Movies, KISS meets the Phantom.
Welcome back to Off to the Witch. I'm your host, Christopher Garitano, and tonight's guest, Jeff Paris, grew up in a rough Chicago neighborhood. His only escape was to dive into rock and roll, particularly the music of KISS and Van Halen. His heavy metal dreams of fame and fortune led him to the dark underground of the Los Angeles music scene of the 1980s, where he was faced with a choice. It's a cautionary tale of music, passion, and dreams. So here's my interview with Jeff Paris.
I was born in Gary, Indiana in 1963, and my parents were quite young, but that ended about 10 years later. What I went through with my mom and dad's divorce was like comic books for a kid would be the rock group KISS, which, you know, they had the colorful posters and the you could look at their albums and never get tired of looking at them. You know, it was like a comic book. And here I was, 10 or 11 when KISS really, you know, when they really first came out, and then a couple years later they got really big. And here I am, 12 years old, and I'm in this divorce situation, not knowing really what to think of that. And then a situation of a stepfather coming in that was abusive. So I spent most of my time locked in my bedroom looking at KISS posters playing, you know, KISS Live 2 as they came out, you know.
Had you experienced anything like KISS before?
Well, growing up, my mom, she had the Elton John, the Animals, and then uh, David Bowie was something similar as far as the theatrics and the stage show. And then of course Alice Cooper. And then he came out, so I knew who Alice Cooper was, but I couldn't really relate with the music because I was so young. It was the Alice Cooper had some deep music. The lyrics and David Bowie also. But when Kiss came out, man, that was like a 12-year-old head. Those guys were singing and playing to 12-year-old heads. And it was like a comic book adventure, man. And it was something that you could escape reality in. I don't know how old you are, but if you were a KISS fan, you'll know exactly what I mean by them taking you out of your everyday life, out of school, out of your homework, out of your neighborhood, and putting you into this crazy world, with the demon dragon and the ace, the space, and all that stuff. And it led me right into wanting to be a guitar god, immediately. I was just struck. At first, I thought Paul Stanley was he was the main thing, but then Ace, it just blew my mind. And here I am in an very abusive situation with a stepfather from Greece, couldn't speak any English, and he was brutal to us kids, and I would hide in my room, and my mother would be abused constantly by him. Much later in life, he just recently passed. We never really sealed things or forgave or anything, but old age mellowed him out. But the abuse was horrendous, and I would escape that by sometimes even hiding under my bed, playing KISS. I would record KISS with a little cassette player, with the little tapes back then. And then I would put the volume really low under my bed and play KISS music with the pillow over my head so I could get away from reality, because loud noise would get me in trouble. So yeah, it was the KISS albums and the KISS posters that put me into the music, into the music world that way.
Yeah, and I think it was that escapist rock and roll that KISS presented. I was also knocked out by them at a very early age. Seeing the KISS Alive album cover with, Gene Simmons with blood all over his mouth was just cool because I was into horror films already. So, but here's the thing. That music inspired you to want to get your hands on a guitar. When did you finally get your hands on a guitar?
I never, ever was bought a guitar. We lived in a small apartment complex. It was a kind of a poor neighborhood. I told you where I was from, and so it was really weird. I got into this habit of collecting beer cans, in the summer, and we lived in this apartment complex, and I was actually a dumpster diver, and I collected beer cans, always looking for the older ones, or and I'd put them in my room. And one time I found a guitar body in a dumpster with a broken guitar neck on it. And I took that home and, KISS albums and everything. And I hung that on my wall because I thought, oh, this looks like something Paul Stanley broke, This is something, because he would break his guitars on stage, at the end of the show, with the drummer, bam, bam, break the guitar and then throw it out in the crowd. And I dreamed of having one of those guitars, I just dreamed it so heavily that they were my day and night. In school, I would daydream. I'd bring their magazines, the KISS magazine, and put it in my textbook and look at it. And of course, I failed school. But yeah, I just became a KISS fan beyond most other people. Decided I wanted to play guitar. And, the best thing I remember about that was when I found that guitar in the dumpster. Later on, I found another guitar in another dumpster that was one of those Tiesco guitars from Sears or Sears and Roebuck guitars, and I took the neck off and I put it on that other body, and I took the body and I laid it in the hallway because I remember I got beat for this. I put the body on the hallway carpet in the landing in our apartment building, and I spray can from somewhere, and I spray painted the body, and left an outline of the guitar, and then I denied doing it. It was like, I got in so much trouble, my stepdad. But Yeah, I put the neck on that guitar, and then I think I put some acoustical strings on it, and the neck was like, the action on it was like an inch off the strings were way up off the neck.
Do you feel that rough situation helped make you into a better guitar player because you had to essentially get over those hurdles as a player? It wasn't comfortable. And
Well, what it did, and later I found out Eddie was the same way, even though he had classical training in piano.
you're talking about Eddie Van Halen, right?
Yes, Eddie Van Halen.
Okay.
Sorry. What it did was, for Eddie Van Halen, was he learned by ear on the guitar. And I didn't know that he learned this way. I didn't know of Eddie Van Halen yet. I was still with the KISS thing.
So you're in your youth, you're blown away by KISS. You find this guitar in a dumpster. You make this makeshift guitar, and now you have that in your hands. And where I was asking you, and I'm curious if the difficulties of having that makeshift guitar, it wasn't perfect. Did that make you a better player? Did that begin because you have to get over those hurdles because your fingers have to be stronger? Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah. See, having a guitar from a dumpster like that, that's a Sears guitar, they didn't have a truss rod in them, so the neck would, the action would go way high off the neck. The strings would be way off, and you'd blister your hands up, and you really built a lot of strength in your hand and your fingers at a young age to play a guitar that was difficult to play. So that when finally, my first Fender Mustang guitar, that was a professional guitar, 3/4 size, I could shred on it by the time I got to that. But it was the KISS records on the turntable that taught me how to play guitar. So I feel like Ace Frehley really taught me how to play guitar. Never had a lesson. I think I had one lesson, if you want to call it that, and it was horrible. And so I taught myself from KISS, from Ace Frehley's lead playing on the KISS albums, Backing the Needle Up, starting Dr. Love over again. The lead break on Dr. Love was the closest thing to the love of the guitar that I love, the sound, which was Eddie Van Halen later on, maybe Boston, the lead playing that they had. And that lead break that Ace did in Dr. Love was incredible. And I learned that myself, backing the needle, back and forth, off of the record, thinking, what a poor soul I am. I can't afford guitar lessons. I got a guitar from a dumpster. My mom and dad won't let me play through an amp. My stepfather would he would not put up with that. And
do you believe in fate, Jeff? Because you're in a dumpster, it must have. How did you feel that day that you found a guitar, something you've been burning to get your hands on, in a dumpster? It must have blown you away, regardless of the condition that it was in.
I thought I was in a horrible place in my life for other reasons, also other than the divorce, but that my parents went through, but the abuse of a stepfather and the abuse he put on my mother that I had to witness, and my sister and my little brother. I mean, some real abusive times there. And I escaped that abuse by crawling into an album. And so spiritually, I put myself on stage with KISS. And, I kept that tradition going into my 20s, in my late 20s. That's how I got into Van Halen, but I really taught myself how to play guitar from the recordings of Ace Frehley. And it's funny that I felt so bad about that, because years later, Eddie Van Halen confessed to the same exact learning, that's how he learned how to play guitar, was backing up Cream records and Black Sabbath records. He would put the needle back, put it until the album was ruined. It would, put the needle back and forth on that solo spot. Eddie did exactly the same thing I did on those albums. And I found out later on that just about every guitar player did that. So
yeah, didn't many great guitar players learn that way? Wasn't Hendrix somewhat self-taught?
Yes, but I just didn't know, because I didn't know of any guitar players. It was like this thing I stumbled onto as a kid that no one else did. I just stumbled onto it and dove into it as like putting blinders on and headphones on from the abuse around me, man. And that's why I started playing guitar. And it was more than just wanting to play guitar. It was like an obsession, a fetish. It was like nothing I can't explain it, man. It was like, I want this more than anything in the world. I want to do what Ace Frehley's doing. And it was really weird because I never got into drugs. I never done them. I wanted to do it completely clear-headed, as Gene Simmons says he did. I wanted it to be done straight and in a respectful way, but I wanted to put this persona like Alice Cooper did the same thing, but he did get into drugs. But Gene Simmons he put something together, and then he was behind that, you know. I mean, it wasn't really him, you know. He was very well educated. He was a school teacher. He didn't buy into any of that stuff and that party and stuff, you know. He was into the girls, but man, he ran it like a business, you know, a big business. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do that, but I wanted the magic of what KISS put into the kids' heads, you know, that escape.
So from listening to you so far, it's like your salvation was connecting much deeper to the music that was healing you during a really rough time. And that's probably the story of a lot of people trying to escape into something that gave them, I don't want to say relief. It just inspired them out of a worse situation. I know that feeling too, you know, for filmmaking is my music. So you're there, and now you finally got your hands on an instrument, and that situation, did you feel like your life was improving because you were now able to make music and connect deeper to the music that was healing you?
No, because I at that point I would get scolded for playing. You know, I'd turn that music down in there, and later on when I did have a little tiny amp playing along with the stereo, I found a way to put a jack into my sister's stereo. I blew the speakers out of it, you know, and then it sounded better because the speakers were, you know, distorted. So now I had distortion because I couldn't afford fuzz boxes and all. But playing, I didn't feel anything until I did a talent show at school, and that changed my whole life because I won the talent show, and I got up and I played really loud, and I played like Ace Frehley, and the kids in the school in the auditorium thought it was the coolest thing they ever seen. And the principal's comes up to the stage, and the top of his head was bright red, you know. He's like, turn that down. And I walk over to the amp in front of all the kids, you know, and I look at him, and I just turned it all the way up, man, to 11, you know. And he was just so frustrated. His head turns red, and I'm blowing the kids' minds in the school, and I won the talent contest. And that was right before lunch. And after lunch, I was like walking down the hallway with the school jock and the most popular girl in the school. I all of a sudden was in a group of the most popular kids in school because I did that with the guitar, and they couldn't believe it.
So that was a huge turning point in your life.
It was the best thing ever in my life, the best feeling I ever had. And, my daughter being born was the greatest thing, of course, but there's no sexual experience I've ever had that was better. It was spiritual, you know, to stand in a dark room, everybody gets quiet, and they're looking at you, and then you turn on this talent that you have, and then people start cheering it like a football game. And then the louder I got and the crazier I played, you know, and of course it was Ace, so I was making a lot of noise, and it didn't matter really what I played, I guess, you know, but I played Ace, and the kids were into it, and they dug it, and it made me popular for the rest of the year. And for the rest of not only that, it propelled a band being made from the class, some of the school members in school, that we put a band together, and we got to rehearse in the choir room, and then we got to play some shows later on that year. So we actually put a school band together that was rock and roll.
So that very first show, though, proved to you proved to yourself and other people that you could make rock and roll, that you can get on stage and you can impress people enough for them to want to see you play live.
Yeah, and have the authorities come up to me, which were the teachers, and say, you won, here's an A+. And the principal later to come up to me and go, you know, I should suspend you, but that was awesome, you know.
So do you think and a lot of rock and roll stars, especially the ones that we're going to talk about forthcoming in this conversation, ones that you met later, that you were on the road with, do you think a lot of them had a very similar situation at school like you did? Maybe their first dose was that battle of the bands or going on stage.
You know, of course, it's easy in a nutshell for me to say my influence was Kiss and Van Halen. That's it. A little bit of Ted Nugent in the beginning, in the middle, just a tiny bit, because there was a space of time between Kiss and Van Halen where I was growing up a little bit, where I was catching on to Kiss's act. You know, I was like, okay, you know, I need a little bit more. I need some music that can challenge me. Okay,
Did
and the
you ever
reason,
think at that time you'd end up working with those guys? Because you did.
well, no, I working with them. I dreamt of seeing them in Chicago, you know, at the amphitheater, man. You know, I wanted to see Kiss when they had the original Kiss when they came. You know, this is like 1978, 79, and I had their posters all over my wall. And you know, you got to remember, they just weren't. It wasn't the music also that I got into. My dad had disappeared. He wasn't there for us. My stepfather was abusive. My mom excused it, and I wanted the personalities of Kiss to be my friends. It was almost as if they became my friends. Like they meant something to me as people. You know, Gene Simmons, Ace Frehley, Peter. I looked at those posters and I thought, and I don't have a big brother. I looked to them like, you know, I needed them to help me, and I suffered horrific anxiety at that stage, as if I was, you know, the panic attacks. I couldn't even. I'd get sick at school. My mom would have to come pick me up. You know, so yeah, I mean, Kiss was like the dad that I always wanted, the uncle I never had, the the friend I never had. So
So it was this incredibly difficult childhood. You know, it was a rough time, but you found salvation in particularly Kiss and your guitar playing.
yeah, it was a horrific time for me, man. It was right at the crossroads of my life. 12 years old, I had this dog that was 11. I don't remember getting him, and you know he died of old age, you know, and I lost him, and it was horrible. So I was going through this huge depression, man. Of the dog was what helped me along up to that point, I guess. And then after that, my dad's gone, and I have this abusive stepfather, and he was knuckles, you know. I mean, he'd be in prison today for some of the shit he pulled on us and did to us. But it, I dove into my own world, and that was the stage. The lights, it looked to me like the lights on the stage were soothing and warm. The lights, there was space on the stage, and there were friends on stage. There was 4 or 5 people on stage that were friends and that were in a family, and the lights, and they were separated from the crowd.
And do you feel like, in a way, everything about that situation, people cheering you on, you being able to play and create your music, the reaction of the crowd, all of that is either transporting you away from the pain that happened previously and creating new days for you, a
New
completely
avenues all the
different
way
life.
because, yeah, huge avenues because later on, when we were taken away from my mom and dad by my grandparents because of it was an abusive situation, and we begged to pretty much get away, and my grandparents were great. My grandfather was the greatest man in my life, you know, but when I moved in with them, I was immediately in a band down the street, and then the next thing we had, which happened to Van Halen early on uh, in junior high, we're now the backstreet kegger party band of the town. So now, and then also we're playing at school, school prom or school concert or something, you know, of that nature. We'd play that. We'd play backyard parties. We would play at the church for wedding receptions, you know, and we're very young, you know. It, later on in Chicago, this is where I was born and raised, South Side. 17 years old with a fake ID, playing Luigi's and playing the South Side Chicago bars, you know, playing a KISS song or, whatever was popular at that time, So yeah, man, it led me into a partying world of friends, and they all got high and drank, and I drank, but I never got to the drug part of it. It brought me too close to the anxiety I suffered under the bed.
Sure. But you were able to escape, you were developing your skills as a guitar player, and you were meeting new people. At what point, because I'm sure at that now at that time that you were kind of having a relative feeling, not the exact one, but as becoming a rock star, right? I mean, people were excited to see you, they knew your band. At what point did you make the decision now, okay, I'm going to make this transition. I want to make it bigger. I want to take this all the way. Or did you not do that?
Yeah. Well, what happened is we're playing in the high school stuff and in the backyard parties. Then we, high school passes by, and then do we want to go to college? Well, hell no, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do any of this. And some of the guys that were with me didn't want to do it. And a couple of them worked in the steel mills out there, following in their father's footsteps. So we had this band together. So our new goal was, hey, man, we're going to be the greatest South Side rock band in the world. And so we ended up rehearsing in Styx, Dennis DeYoung's original childhood house in Chicago Heights. It's a little further south, but we ended up playing in their original rehearsal space in the garage that their father had soundproofed.
And how did that come about? How did you discover that was the place where Styx rehearsed?
We played these parties and people knew of us, and this guy goes, "Hey man, my parents are pretty cool, and they heard you at that one gig that we did. It was outside thing, a bash, and they know that you guys need a rehearsal space, and so come on, come on over and rehearse." And we rehearsed there for months. And if they still had their logo, their Styx logo was still on the wall. And it was right off of Chicago Road. That was the first taste of, wow, somebody famous came from here. And the neighbor next door come banging on the door with a baseball bat. And the neighbor said, that same guy did that to Styx. So if I ever meet Dennis DeYoung, I'm going to tell him, you remember the guy with the baseball bat? It's your band rehearsal. But I never did get to meet any of Styx, worked their shows and seen them in concert, but really never got to meet them and ask them that question. But yeah, it turned into kid stuff into, hey man, you know what? I don't want to go to college. I don't want to do anything in life. I want to make it. And at this time, the great Eddie Van Halen's album comes out, and they're already on their second album here.
And what was and the first one was, for the people that don't know?
Van Halen 1. It was 1978 recording.
And what was the first track off of Van Halen 1 that really hit you, where you were just blown away?
Okay, so here's what happened. I'm into KISS a little bit and into Ted Nugent, and we were playing 18 from Alice Cooper at the backyard parties, and Hot Blooded and things like that, Song Boston, things that were around the same time. And then one time my sister, and it always happened with my sister where I discovered artists. That's how I discovered KISS, really, because she brought the first album into, where I first heard them and went, wow. So basically what happened is my sister's in a room and I hear this siren, and I'm thinking, I'm running down the hallway, tornado, I'm thinking it was a tornado siren going off in the village, because we had the tornado sirens,
Oh, wow.
And, yeah, so I'm in the basement. I hear this, the intro to Running with the Devil is a siren that they recorded. It's actually Alex Van Halen's Volkswagen horn. They took off the car, recorded it, and then ran it backwards and dropped it. And so when you hear the very first thing on a Van Halen album is a huge siren. It sounds just like a tornado siren. So I run up the hallway. I'm like, "Sis, there's a tornado." She goes, "No, this is it." And then she's playing this album, and the first thing that struck me was Jamie's Crying. And I'm thinking, this song is stupid. Oh, Jamie's Crying. I think this is the most stupid song I've ever heard, And she kept playing that song over and over because that's what she dug. And then she left the album on, and it did it again from the beginning. And then I heard that drum, and then this guitar solo came from nowhere. There was no music with it, which I never heard before, except on the KISS Live when Ace would do a little solo. But on an album. Boom! I hear this song. It's a guitar solo, and it was like if we were being invaded from Mars or something. To me, that's what it was like. That thing blasted, and I heard that, and I knew it was a guitar, but I couldn't believe it was, and I couldn't believe anybody could make that sound. Not even Jimi Hendrix. I was like, "What the hell is that? Who is that?" You know. Go in my sister's room and I play it over and over and over, and she's, "Get out of my room." I'm sitting there, with the album cover in my hand, looking at this, looked like a young Mexican guy, with the razor stubble and stuff. And he had this guitar, had these stripes all on it, man. I'm like, this guy, whoa, who is this? Eddie Van Halen, I listened to the album over and over and over to this day.
Wow.
To this day, I listen to that album today. If you get on my Facebook, I'm playing the song on the radio for my dogs. You really got me. That album changed my whole life. I wanted to be Eddie Van Halen from that moment on. And it was a lifelong lesson to me about that.
And had anyone played guitar like that before Eddie Van Halen? Had anyone sounded like that, even remotely like that?
Nobody. Like I said.
And everybody knew it at the time, too. That's why.
Yeah, the closest thing I ever heard in a fluke, even Ace Frehley didn't sound like that, but he did solo in Dr. Love. He pulled it off in the studio and he did a cool solo, and I thought that's got the meat and the magic that Eddie brought to the table when he played, and just barely. But when I heard Eddie do the things he did on that first album, it was a spiritual thing, man. I was like, this guy is unbelievable.
And now that you mentioned that, and I want to talk about this here and there throughout learning about your adventures, your journey, is that what do you think that is? Is there something, and some people are going to say, no, it's not, and I'll tell you exactly how it came about. And it's like, well, there's another level, things we can't see. Is there something you believe, let's say, I'll frame the question out this way. Do you believe that there's something a bit supernatural when someone like Eddie Van Halen comes along and plays that way? Because not only is he unique, but think about all, and I know you have, including yourself, all the people that someone like Eddie Van Halen affected and inspired to make music. I think it's more profound than people realize.
Well, I found out early on, my drummer never idolized anyone. We were huge Black Sabbath fans as a band. Bill Ward was the guy, and later on, we met Bill Ward, and Lance, my drummer, was trying to collect rent money from him because he was managing a rehearsal studio, and Bill Ward was actually broke and giving drum lessons at this point. And I'm like, there's your guitar, there's your drum god. He's like, he just never was impressed with fame or anybody else like that. Nothing. He didn't have a hero. His still working dad was his hero. For me, I was trying to get away from Chicago. I was trying to get away from my upbringing. I had a different upbringing than he did. And I wanted to do something different and outstanding, something beyond belief. And so what happened was I got this feeling, when you say spiritual, I ended up like, it's hard to explain, but it's like an orgasm. There's a feeling you get when you have an orgasm that you don't get in anything else in life. The feeling I get when I hear the right song or the right memory or something, that it's a feeling I get that's as good or better than that when it's nurtured, when it comes up. Eddie's done that a few times playing. It's not sexual. It's spiritual. The magical sounds that he made on the guitar. Sometimes a song will bring it out in me. It just makes life okay. You ever drive down the road and a song comes on from your distant past when you were a kid, and it just makes you feel all fucking warm like a blanket and good.
Oh yeah, no, music has blown me away as much as movies have.
Yeah, it's like it makes you feel good and warm. Everything smells better. Everything's clearer. Everything's brighter for the moment that song plays, and music's magical that way. And so I went on that was the high I wanted. That was the drug I wanted, I wanted that feeling. And I thought the person that brought it to the table every time was Eddie Van Halen. The way he wrote the guitar, the way he played it, the way he wrote music. I got warm and I felt like I was on a surfboard in California every time I heard Eddie play guitar.
So not to get too deep into, technical guitar playing just for the rest of the audience, but give us a little bit of that. What is it about Eddie Van Halen's ability that a lot of people have a hard time nailing? A lot of other guitar players just can't do it. What can he achieve as a guitar player, as a technical guitar player or musician, that a lot of people have a hard time
The thing that's
feeling? Is it
Yeah, well, the thing about Eddie was is that he listened to the same people we did: Eric Clapton, Black Sabbath, Tony Iommi, the same people. And he all of a sudden did something on the guitar that no one ever did before, and no one ever has done after. Really, people have tried to copy him, and some people might steal a vibe copying him, but they never quite get it right. He always did it different, and I don't know how he did it, and that's what is the magic of it. If I find that out, I might not like it. Did he sell his soul or something? I don't know. He just has a magic.
That's and again, like I want to have that discussion like no one really has before. When someone says they sold their soul, there are these basic broad strokes to it, and that Faustian tale where you sign a deal with the devil, you get fame, riches, fortune, and then it spirals down into some abysmal situation. Now that has happened, but is on a metaphysical level possible for someone to sell their soul, a more subtle, I guess, subtle level, even though the effects are the same? Where do you make that decision to sell your soul? How does that happen? And we can revisit it throughout your journey, but just at first, like touching on this subject matter now that you mention it, what do you think selling your soul is?
I think everybody uh, comes to a point in their life, whether it be wanting something so bad as a musical dream or being an actor or a writer. They want it so bad that they pray to God and make a deal with God. And some people might make a deal with the devil, And I think there was times, I would, oh dear Lord, I feel the magic. I saw Eddie playing live one time, and it was unbelievable. I says, "Oh dear God, I'll do anything to be able to be like that and do my own thing. I want to be this guy, but I want to be this guy being me, like nobody's ever done it before. What? Please lead me there. I'll do anything. I'll be greater than Danny Thomas. I'll do good things in life. I won't do drugs. I won't hurt anybody. Uh, Feelings. I'll be a good person. I'll make this happen, man. You know, I'll do great things, and maybe that is my version of selling my soul. I don't know, making a deal.
See, to me, that's the antithesis because your promise was to be on the straight and narrow. I think maybe it's complicated, like selling your soul could be, all right, man. Like remember Bradley Noel from the band Sublime? His perspective or Hendrix's perspective with heroin was that heroin was going to make them better artists. And that in turn, in the form of the heroin is a metaphysical form of selling your soul because eventually it's going to
Yes.
take you out.
Yeah, the Beatles did it. They did drugs big time, and now they don't. The Survivors, and they wouldn't, and they're like, if they had to do all over again, wouldn't do it. But it did change their writing.
I think the conceptually there you are selling your soul. We haven't taken into account in all these years. Many people just don't take into account. There's so many other levels of existence, and so if you're saying, "Hey, man, this dangerous drug, heroin, I'm going to shoot this in my vein because it's going to give me some amazing songs," and maybe it will, but there's a price to pay, and in that I see as selling your soul. And there's so many examples of that, that youthful club, they call it the 27 club. They're all dying at this young age, and a lot of them were involved in that particular drug.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I would be too chicken shit to try to sell my soul or to do something to that level of doing a drug, because I might not come back, or I might not be the same when I came back. I think that people have decisions every day, and it might be considered selling your soul.
Okay, so now that we've said that, I wouldn't agree with you selling your soul. I wouldn't do it. And what I'm saying is I think there's a harder road because it's not instantaneous like putting a spike in your vein and then all of a sudden getting this euphoria that inspires you. The other is now through the mind and concentration, which someone like Frank Zappa never did drugs. And look at what he created.
Yeah. There's people that they don't need drugs, man. They got it. That's unfortunately Eddie Van Halen did drugs and alcohol, but he really got into that and over the top of his genius talent that diminished it in some ways. That stopped it even. There's many years he didn't continue on doing anything different.
Sure, because
alcohol.
eventually it's going
Yeah.
to eat you alive.
So that's kind of is there something you could take? Yeah, well, alcohol, drugs. You you can do things in life that are selling your soul, I believe, and it's come up a few times in my life where I thought that's exactly what I'd be doing if I did that, and I'm not going to do that. And
Sure.
not even in
So
not just a physical
So you
level.
were committed. You were committed to not messing things up in that way, and you had your own way of thinking, and even prayer and meditating on things and practice, and you were getting better at what you were doing. What was the next step? What was the next level where you felt, "Hey, man, this is growing. This is going forward."
Well, me and my drummer Lance and my singer and bass player, we decided to go to L.A. and we loaded up in two cars, a 71 Riv and a 63 Impala, and we loaded up our equipment and we headed to L.A. We broke down in Salt Lake City, and we ended up living there most of our life after that. And two of my friends still live there, and one of them died there. So we broke down in Salt Lake City on our way to LA. We ended up going to Las Vegas, into San Diego, and up through LA and San Francisco, and we ended up going back to LA many years later and playing the club scenes and living there and working jobs there and doing what we had to do to survive and write music and play. And we played the clubs, and that's where I learned a lesson or got the opportunity, I believe, to sell my soul spiritually or doing things that are against my better half to succeed in my dream. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What I mean, in what form did that? And we're not, tonight we're not selling anything to the audience in terms of religion or anything. We all have our personal views, but I think this concept is a real thing metaphysically. Selling your soul conceptually exists. And so I thought it would be a great discussion with you as somebody who's been through the world of rock and roll and really observed a lot of different, extremely famous, even immortal people, if you can call it that. Their music lives on forever. And so now that you mentioned that in particular, would you give me more details about that particular, if you want to call it an opportunity that you passed up?
I lived in Hollywood with my band, and we were rehearsing a lot, and we were trying to break into the club scene. And if you played Gazzarri's or the Troubadour, you paid to play. And what that meant is the management would give you 100 tickets, and you sold those 100 tickets for $10 a piece back in 1985 or 86 or 87. And you would sell those tickets, but you would buy those tickets from the management. So you're in the club, we want to play here. You play a demo tape for them. Do you have a video? Back then, it wasn't like today, in the mid 80s and stuff. Do you have a demo? You put a cassette in a blaster, and play them a song. And then, yeah, here's it's $1,000. Here's, some tickets, 100 tickets or whatever, and you would sell those tickets, and you better damn well sell them, because if you didn't get your money back, or you'd break even. You would pay to play. So now you sold these tickets. Anything above and over that at the door was your pay. And, you would get so many drinks for free. Bill Gazzarri was pretty good with the musicians if he liked you, Van Halen went through this. David Lee Roth was the guy he went to, and they did the same exact thing. And the bands that drew the that sold more beer and alcohol in those bars by having a larger crowd were the bands that played more and more often and ended up going, getting signed, getting looked at,
And you weren't really fond of that process at the time. You were against
I was
it.
intimidated by it, man. I was like, God, we rehearsed behind Guitar Center in storage units in the summer. It was like an oven inside the storage unit, and we're rehearsing, and we would hear a ruckus. We'd take a sound break. We'd hear another band rehearsing. And I guess there was 2 or 3 bands that were doing the same thing we were doing, which was against the storage house rules. We would rent a storage unit, and then we would put our gear in there to store it. But then we would run extension cords to the nearest outlet and practice there. And one time, another band was doing that, and they were extremely loud. And the guys in my band liked doing drugs and getting high. So we heard this music, and we walked up a hill around the back of the complex to another storage unit. And it was Guns N' Roses rehearsing, and this was the Guns N' Roses. This is the Guns N' Roses on Appetite. This was a couple of years before Appetite, and they were there rehearsing. And here's the scene. I walk up, my drummer already knew one of the guys in the band and was selling him drugs. I don't know if it was heroin or cocaine. I don't know what it was, but the drug scene was huge then. Slash actually was making money selling drugs. And he would sell drugs. He's admitted to that, selling drugs and pot and things of that nature to survive by guitar strings, And, there's Slash standing in the storage unit, sweat pouring off of him. There's an amplifier speaker or a monitor over there with a hot plate on it with a can of pork and beans on it that had been on there too long. And the pork and beans is boiled over and rolling down the side of the speaker cabinet. And there's mattresses. Yeah, there's mattresses lined up against the wall with pillows and blankets still on them because some of the guys were living there.
See, a lot of people don't realize those rough days for bands that forthcoming turned into legends, stadiums, selling out stadiums. And in their early days, they're in a storage facility, cooking on a hot plate. A lot of people don't get that.
Yeah, hot plate, the smell of dirty laundry, the road cases and things are out on the asphalt in front of the storage unit so they could have room to stand and rehearse. And there's beds leaned up for sound, but you can tell they were made to sleep on. There's a couple girls there, and they're rehearsing. And yes, I recognized a couple of the songs they were rehearsing from Appetite. It's clear as day. My bass player, he's no longer with us, but him too. We walk up at first, and they're in the storage unit, but Axl is sitting out on a road case with his microphone with a cord stretched out about 10 feet outside of the storage unit. So it's cooler, and he can really hear what's going on. And he's just sitting there, and they're not playing. They're just writing. And Axl Rose is sitting on a road case with a piece of, a notebook and a pencil writing, or a pen, and he's sitting there writing songs. And we kind of walk up, and he gives us this horrible look like, oh, fuck, you're disturbing, our rehearsal. He goes, hey, man, this is a closed rehearsal. And my guys were pretty good guys in the band, but I was kind of I was kind of an ass. I look like, Robert De Niro. I look behind me and I look above me and I go, looks wide open to me, because they had the door open. and he,
well, I mean, first of all, nobody should be put on a pedestal. I don't care if they're famous or not, but at that time, you all, in terms of your band status, if that's what you want to call it, we're all equal, right? You were all rehearsing in the same storage facility.
They weren't Guns N' Roses. They weren't famous. We didn't know who they were. We never saw them in our life, never heard of them. We just walk up, and there's Axl. He's sitting on a road case with his red hair, and it looked like he had yellowish green teeth, and he didn't look well. He looked like a skinny roadie. And he was sitting there, and this is a closed rehearsal, and I was the big guy because I was the healthy one, and I would have put him down in 10 seconds, and a couple of my other guys would have too, And I look at him, I go, it doesn't look like it's a closed rehearsal. And right in the middle of that, I go, we're actually rehearsing down there, and you're drowning us out. And right in the middle of that, someone in the band inside recognized my bass player. Hey, man, come in here, And the bass player sold some drugs, and it kind of broke that up, but it didn't turn out too well between me and Axl. He handed us flyers. My bass player, Robin, had that flyer in his bass case where he kept his strings through our whole career after that, because of me, because that I was cocky to him. And then when we turned around and walked away, I wadded up that flyer and threw it at my feet 2 steps away from Axl Rose that he had handed me. And I was shaking my head. And I mean, I just said, it looks like an open fucking rehearsal to me, dude. And the other guy's going, well, we're rehearsing down here. And Axl's looking at me like I'm a prick, you know, and I thought he was being a prick. And then he goes, well, here, come see us if you want. And I just took his flyer and wadded up, threw it on the ground, and Robin folded his and put it in his pocket. I turned around.
Now, a lot of people don't, I learned of this a while back from watching the metal years. So flyers were a big thing back then for all the bands. You had to have one, and that's how you got people to come to see your show. There was no, for the people that are a little younger, there was no internet back then. You had to physically walk.
They were selling the same tickets to the same clubs we were. They were no bigger than us at this point. And, walking back, my drummer, who was 10 years older than the rest of us, goes, dude, you should never do that because you never know who you're going to meet that you stepped on the way down trying to climb up again, and I said, and I laughed at them. I go, they sounded horrible. They'll never make it. They'll never make it. And it did. It sounded terrible what I was hearing.
Right. And that was probably the story of a lot of aspiring professional bands at the time, including your own and including Guns N' Roses. Where, in terms of the Faustian idea, at what point does a band like that, like Guns N' Roses, when you ran into them, when you were an equal band, maybe better, much better, do they sign that on the dotted line and become something else? And how do they get to that point?
Good question, man, because it was a year later or so. My story goes that I ended up leaving Hollywood because I despised the scene, the drugs, the lifestyle, the scene. It was not how I was brought up with my grandparents. I was actually married and had a wife and dog at home when I went out to LA the second time. I got the hell out of there. I didn't want to sell my soul. And I had an incident that came up that was just that. And I found out what my answer would be. And I went home and never went back. And then,
are you okay with sharing exactly what that was?
Yeah, actually, I worked at Grauman's Chinese Theater, and I needed extra money because there was 4 of us living in a cockroach hotel behind Grauman's Chinese Theater. Our dumpster was right behind Grauman's Chinese Theater where the alley was. Danny Bonaducci was actually living in his car next to that dumpster. Okay, and he was homeless, and we actually had an apartment with a washer and dryer in the hallway. We had some porn star live upstairs. I can't remember his name now, but my bass player did a lot of drug deals with people up there. And, we would have rock stars coming in for drugs all the time. C.C. DeVille was one. He was in our apartment many times doing heroin with some of the bandmates, and it was horrible because I didn't even get high. I worked at Grauman's Chinese Theater trying to follow a dream, And so I took on a night gig because there's always a lot of partying going on. When we weren't rehearsing, I would go back and I would take a bus to the studio lots and I would give tickets from my manager to tourists to come back at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock to be driven to the sets of Married with Children or Night Court or Chachi in Charge. Or in the morning, sometimes if I was really desperate for money, I'd get up really early and go back and we would do the Today Show or one of those types of things. And I would bring 30 people with me in a bus from the theater to the sets for them to have audiences. And then we'd sit there and they'd have a comedian come out and entertain us. And then they'd say, do this. And this applause sign comes on, clap, do this. And then they would roll the show. And so we would watch Married with Children get shot, Mr. President with George C. Scott, shows like that, The Munsters that was redone in the 80s. I brought tons of people. Well, doing that, I met a man that was an agent, and he had a studio. He was he had many child actors in his business. He owned I still have his business card. I'm not going to say his name because it's, I won't do that here, but I have his business card and I'll take a picture of it and send it to you. But anyway, he was a big guy. He was bigger than me. He was in great shape. And I met him when I had a crowd. He goes, hey, you want to go on the set with me to Mr. President? And I go, sure. He goes, I have some business with George C. Scott. And I go, really? And he goes, yeah. So he showed up at my apartment I told him I live right behind Grum's. I was sitting on the steps. He pulls up in a Porsche, a red Porsche convertible. And I get in and he takes me to the studio and brought me backstage. And he was great friends with George C. Scott. I'm standing there talking with George C. Scott, and like I knew him, and he was very interested in me. He was talking to me and he was like, oh, great. And they were doing business. I don't know if he was one of his actors or what the hell the deal was. But that night, I'd already known him for a month because I've seen him in all these shows, and he was the agent for Eddie Munster for the new Munster show that was being shot. He named off a lot of names to me that I probably shouldn't mention that are famous actors now that, that back then were 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds, Johnny Depp, people of that nature, Leonardo, actors of that caliber that are now famous that were in his agency that it was in the Tower Record building, and there was a studio there where they did acting lessons, and they even had their own makeup and hair artists where they cut their hair, they took your headshots, and they put your career together for you and managed you, and that school still exists on that business card. The person I'm talking about, I believe, has passed away, had cancer and passed away. But anyway, come drive me back home, and I'm sitting in his convertible. It's California, and talking to this guy, and he's like a man's man, just a cool dude. And then he just leans over and puts the moves on me, man, like put me in total shock, hands between the legs on the knee. Hey man, I can make things happen for you. How do you, the first thing he said to me before he did any of that was, so Jeff, how do you feel about signing on with us? His organization, his agency. And I'm like, well, yeah, man, I've been an extra before. I've done some extra work out here. Sure. He goes, no, I mean, you sign on. We're going to take some pictures of you. You're going to be groomed and taught. You're going to get lessons. We're going to put some effort, some money behind you. We're going to make this happen. And I says, great. He goes, how do you feel about cutting the hair? And I says, oh, I won't cut my hair, man. He's like, you won't cut your hair. I go, no, man. I'm in a rock band. We're here. This is my dream. I'm working, doing all this to support my dream. I'm in the Bad Boys, man. We're playing the clubs. We're going to get signed. I'm in my 20s. We're going to do this. Yeah, but maybe you could, wear a wig or something. I can get you some parts if you cut your hair. He wanted me to cut my hair. And I said, no. So we got off that subject, and then he leaned over and put the moves on me when he found out I wasn't willing to be groomed. And he put the homosexual advances on me big time, grabbing me and it's very intimidating to get grabbed when you're a pretty good sized guy yourself and you work out by a bigger guy.
Sure. I mean, I heard the story Terry Crews told in the middle of a party, man, that happened to him by a very similar guy. And the thing is, it happens to women. It happens to everybody.
Yeah. And, it was like, the guy was like, Kelsey from the Chiefs, man. He's a big guy, good looking blonde guy. He had everything going for him, and
sure. And this is the thing that is on that metaphysical level, what I truly believe is selling your soul, because it's something you normally would not have done. And now you've got this thing offered to you, and there's a price. And the price is you're going to do this thing now, maybe more than once, maybe a bunch of times, something that you would have never done otherwise, for fame and fortune. And you turned it down. I'd do the same and
back
have.
then, man, I had the looks. I'll send you some pictures. I did nothing but weight train. I'm 6 foot tall. I had the hair, the golden hair. I had the David Lee Roth thing going as a guitar player. And I had the look, and it was good for the band. I always played shirtless and all that. We had the image, and this guy took it on himself for a personal joyride to molest me is what I believe. And could he have gotten me somewhere? Absolutely. Probably. I probably wouldn't be sitting here in this room right now if I had taken his advice, because he offered me quite a chance at cutting my hair and signing up with an agency and getting roles. And he literally begged.
And the thing is, how many people do you think in his agency, all these famous people over the years that had to go through
all
these,
of them?
Yeah.
Because that's what he told me. I ended up, he tried to talk me into having sexual you know, not he wanted to fondle me and not have me do anything. You know, he wanted to have oral sex on me. And I'm just looking at him turning red as a go. And I was pumped. I was pissed. And I'm like, fucking, how dare you, man? You know, I had no idea this was coming in my head, I'm saying. And when he put the moves on, I moved closer. I pushed his head really hard to the other side, violently, my answer was made up for me. I got out of the car and I slammed his door and I just kicked the hell out of the side of his door. And I turn around and walk away. You want to know what he said to me? And I know you can say it. Exactly what he said to me.
What did he say?
As loud as he could, he screamed, "You'll never fucking work in this town, buddy."
Oh, I've heard that before. And
that's what he said. I kicked his car and he's like, "You'll never work in this fucking town. I'll guarantee you that." And I'm like, "Fuck you." And I turned around and I walked in.
So this raises a question. Did you see a lot of people doing things they normally would not have done in that scene, in that rock and roll scene in the 80s?
Yeah, I had a guy that was a music genius. His mom and dad sent him out to go to MI, and he was our roommate. And he was a very, like a Mormon type of guy, but he had the look and he had the long hair. He had the Eddie Van Halen boyish look. He had everything going for him. And he started doing the drugs to fit in. Because we would go to a party and Duff would be there from Guns N' Roses, and there would be people in the room from other rock bands that were drug addicts. And I wouldn't participate in the drugs. So therefore I was kind of like, "Ooh, he must be a narc, or he's outside the club. He's not in here participating with us." You know, you don't do the drugs and you don't do the scene. You don't fit in unless you're lucky like Gene Simmons and you do it without playing the game. There's a definite game that you have to play back in the mid '80s to make it in a hair band. You know, Guns N' Roses, Van Halen, any of those deals. You either drank like a fish, or you did cocaine, or you did drugs, because that's how you got in the offices and that's how you met the people. And that's how you got in the club. So that in itself to me was selling my soul. I refused to do it with the drugs, and I refused to do it like Madonna, I've been told, did it. And names I will not repeat that are famous now that did it. From the same person that I had met. And I believe I could have been one of those people, you know, because some of those people weren't there then and now they're here. And I saved the business card of this person that did this to me. And it was in my wallet for many years. My wallet was put away with my bar cards and things from the 80s and 70s. And one day I was going through my wallet and I found that card and I couldn't believe I still had it. And I Googled up the guy's name. And he was a huge producer and agent. He had many things under his belt. He had and the agency still exists in the same space, but he just wasn't around anymore. And I think I read that he had passed away or died from cancer or something to that respect. But I wanted to find a picture of the guy, but I never could.
Seems like those guys were in Legion and still are in a way, you know, because again, everybody from, let's say, Harvey Weinstein to the gentleman who, and I forgot his name, who attacked Terry Crews, who's a huge guy at a party. Those guys are in abundance. They basically ran the whole show. So you could only imagine everyone getting famous because of this.
You know as well as I do, there's a room. Eventually you go into a room with one person or two people and they look you in the eye and they say, "Do you want to join the club?" And I'm telling you, that's joining their club. In other words, you'd be surprised what happens in Hollywood.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
There are those who say that this quiet town holds many secrets. Legend has it that beneath this very tower, a dark force had its eyes set on the children.
We were told that what was going on there was for the benefit of humanity.
What would you say to the people who say, well,
all these children were kidnapped and murdered and you were a part of it, what would you tell them?
I did approve of it, but there was nothing I could do about it.
They wanted a large number of programmed boys to be used for mind control operations.
And there are others who say it's still happening to this day.
I don't know, I for myself find it a little suspicious that all the evidence has been conveniently destroyed.
Let's put it this way. If you're sitting there with 20 guns pointed at you, what are you going to do? Whatever the hell they want!
Watch Montauk Chronicles now for free on Tubi, Plex, Roku, and available for download on Amazon and Apple TV.
One of the world's hottest rock and roll bands is coming. It's going to be the biggest show ever in the Hampton Coliseum with Van Halen.
Girl, you really got me now.
The 1984 tour comes to Tidewater Wednesday night, 8 p.m. at Hampton Coliseum. Van Halen with 24 tons of sound and lights. Tickets are available at all Ticketron locations, including Trax, Mothers, Birdland, and the Hampton box office. Wednesday night at Hampton Coliseum, Van Halen. You now have fair warning. Van Halen's 1984 tour is unchained. Get your tickets now for Van Halen live at Hampton Coliseum Wednesday night at 8 p.m. One of the world's hottest rock and roll bands, Van Halen, an FM 99 music event from Cellar Door.
Again, a lot of people don't realize the roads traveled to get to that dream. It's so hard, and so many people don't make it. So I have a question. So you made this decision not to proverbially sell your soul, or just literally sell your soul, to this guy, okay, who was making this promise: if you did this thing you normally wouldn't do. You're still pursuing your dream after this regardless. What was the next stage in your journey? What happened next?
Well, I went back home and devoted myself for the next 10 years to my wife and my dog, and a landscaping business and a wood shop that I created. And I made quite a bit of success with a little wood shop, making replicas of antiques and cedar chests with my brother-in-law. And at the same time, I had a landscaping business where I made some of the best friends of my life were illegal Mexicans that had come over and ended up helping them get permanent citizenship here. And to this day, one of those people owns my old landscaping business now and brought his family here and is doing really well. And then some of my musicians that didn't make it in LA came back and worked for me on my landscaping crews,
And that was doing well. And so what got you back out on the road? That next chapter of the story is where you encountered Eddie Van Halen and a whole bunch of other people. And what were you doing at the time?
So basically what happens is, you ever see Planes, Trains, and Automobiles? And Steve Martin is on the bus, and he's going home, and he has these flashbacks of John Candy. You remember that?
Yes.
That happened to me on the plane when I left Hollywood. I was on the plane and I was headed back, and I had my Marshall head. They put it in the cabin of the plane with the pilot. Can you believe that? And my guitar was in the overhead. And I go back home, but I had a mosaic thing happen in my head of what I had just gone through in Hollywood, all linear, like in snapshots, from the time that I got nose to nose in a fight with Danny Bonaducci on a street corner when I was trying to sell our band's tickets and he was trying to sell his autograph. There was a time when my band's rehearsing and we got interrupted by a huge knock at the door, which was just about kicking the door off the hinges because we were loud. And we had a bar across the door, and I opened the door in the middle of the night, and there's Fonzie standing there with a lens around his neck. Henry Winkler, staring at me. Hey guys, hey, and my drummer won't stop playing because he's, you know how drummers are. And I'm like, dude. Henry comes in and standing. He goes, guys, I'm shooting a movie across the street, and we're picking you guys up. You guys sound great, but hey, man, you want to come have dinner with us? Can we work something out? And he was very cool, and we walked back with him to the movie set and had dinner with Billy Crystal and Alan King and Henry Winkler and a bunch of other stars.
And what movie was it?
Memories of Me. Memories of Me.
Memories of Me.
And I knew they were shooting a movie there because it was made at Grauman's Chinese Theater, which I worked at, and I was an assistant manager. I would walk down in front of the Wax Museum and everything with Henry Winkler. And Henry Winkler, we walked up to a homeless guy playing guitar on a curb. And we stood there for probably 20, 30 minutes, me and Henry Winkler, because Henry says, take a walk with me, because we heard someone playing guitar. And we walked up like they did with us, finding us. And Henry started throwing songs at him. And this guy could play anything Henry threw at him. And he played it so well. Henry was putting $20 bills, $10 bills in this guy's cup, on the curb, a homeless guy.
It makes you wonder about the gentleman on the curb, his ability to play, right? You're listening to this guy. He's blowing you away. And we don't know his story. We don't know anything about him.
Yeah. Henry's like Edmund Fitzgerald. He'd do this. He'd start the song out, perfect pitch, perfect tune. He would do a Simon and Garfunkel. He'd start out and whatever Henry Winkler popped out at him, the guy started playing, and and it was like 10 or 15 of those songs. And I bet you Henry gave him $80 to $100 back then. In his.
Did you ever wonder what got him, the man on the street, to the point where he was at, but he retained his ability? Like, what made him homeless? Did you think about that?
What I thought of him was, and this is Henry Winkler said, that Henry Winkler's a hell of a guy, hell of a nice guy. We were amazed by the guy's talent and how clear he was and how good he was. But I remember Henry Winkler, when we were walking back, I go, that guy's incredibly good. And he goes, I bet you he's one of the happiest people we've ever met. That's what he said. I'll bet you he's one of the happiest people that we've ever met.
So that so that's really interesting to me. So imagine, if you will, the gentleman on the street said no to any offer for him to sell his soul, kept his music, and understood the purity of knowing how to play and still affecting people walking by. And what maybe Winkler was somebody that held on to his soul as well, if you think about it. Because he seems that type of guy.
He told me,
really sold
yeah,
out.
he told me back then, because I spent a lot of time standing around with him, and I hit it off good with people. I don't know how I do it. I just hit it off, and I did. And he used to tell me, I had a tough. I'm dyslexic, and because I told him I wasn't able to finish high school all the way, and that because I had to leave. My mom and dad and the situation I was in, I went out on my own early, and he had similar problems with dyslexia and being made fun of, and he had a tough life, and so you relate with that, and you're like, it's really weird. And we know people together like this where you think of them as something else, like Fonzie. This is every now and then you got to pinch yourself. Oh man, wait a minute, I'm standing here with Fonzie. No man, I'm standing here with this great guy, Henry Winkler, who's probably one of the nicest guys I've ever met. His head is on a very level plane. And he's
sure. I think there are a lot of people that made it that didn't sell their soul. I think that's a misconception. People think that everybody that makes it sold their soul. I think maybe a majority, maybe, but I think that...
the weird thing about it was when this happened, Fonzie, Happy Days was just taken off the air. So Henry Winkler was still that guy. He was still that. The face was the same. The Happy Days ran from what was it, 73, 74 to 82 or 83 or something like that. And now we're into 86, 87. It was only 3 or 4 years before that Henry Winkler was portraying Fonzie. So it all it was really cool to be with someone that's still, you just can't believe the contrast between the real person and the character. And that also happened in rock and roll. My persona of Eddie Van Halen was completely different than what I thought it was.
So so at that time, it's so really interesting. You're meeting these people, you're having these encounters. you see this man on the street, and it gave you a moment of thought. I'm sure you thought a lot about it at the time. What was the next stage of this? Because now you're back into the rock and roll world in a different way, but now working with very famous people, and some of which were your heroes.
Completely, yeah. I met a man named Ladd Anderson, and he worked for the IA Local 99, and he had huge sonority. He was way up there, like number 2, number 3. And he asked me, I played bass for him at a couple country shows because he was a country singer. And he asked me if I would be interested in working some shows around my musical career. And I said, absolutely. It's like working a carnival job, And so I worked, Stevie Wonder, and I fell in love with it, and I did like Tiffany and bands of that nature Oingo Boingo bands, things like that. And I told our steward, Mike Schoenhart at the time, I says, listen, man, if Van Halen ever comes to town, I would, he looked at me before I could finish the sentence, and he goes, I've known you long enough already to know you're the first one on the call, So it happens. And Van Halen comes, I can't wait. And I start, I work the Van Halen show. And I had met Eddie Van Halen, in 1981 as a fan at the hotel they were staying at, which is a long, long story, and it's very interesting. But I had met Eddie at that point. This was the first professional time meeting him where I was there for a purpose. I was being paid. I was being paid professional to be there. And
I just want to say really quick before we go further on this thread. So this is, destiny is something, it's so, a life complex. You say, when you were going back on the plane, you were reviewing your life like trains, planes, and automobiles. There's going to be another time where there'll be another time when you do that. And I'm sitting here listening to your life in short, in this really cool interview, but it's a short version. And I'm thinking that your destiny was to work with these guys, and there's something more valuable in, I think, your experiences than being the drugged out dude that got some money and, more girls than you usually did and some fame that you didn't get or whatever. And then you crash and it all gets taken away. In your case, you found the value in everything you loved since you were a kid. And it was about to come full circle now in a way I think only you would appreciate later on.
Yeah.
So, okay. Am I right about
this?
Yes.
It took forever for me to come to terms with not getting signed and being 59 years old, almost 60 in a month. It took me forever to realize that it's a good thing that I didn't make it. It's okay. I was supposed to do this journey to find what real happiness is, because most of those people that I had encountered and worked with were not happy. And Eddie Van Halen.
Well, one thing I want to say, and I don't mean to I have no interest in cutting you off, but I have to say this. You're still alive. And next year, you might come out with an album. And everything you ever wanted was given because look, if you believe that there's a cadence to life, that there's a clockwork to it, the story's still going, my friend. So saying you didn't make it just means you didn't sell out in a way, or you didn't give yourself away, and not at that time. But, what a difference a day makes. You know what I'm saying? Like, everything can change tomorrow, my friend.
You meet so many people. I did this job, and it taught me the reality of it. Who these people really were. From Barry Manilow. Barry Manilow's a wonderful human being, wonderful person. Michael Anthony from Van Halen, a wonderful human being. There's so many different. Chuck Berry. I mean, I hung out with Chuck Berry for a whole day, driving him around in my car.
All right, I heard he was a madman. You have to tell me the Chuck Berry story.
Well, it was an IA encounter. I was professionally called by Mike, our steward, to drive up to Deer Valley, and not do a load in or a load out unless I wanted to, which was the generic. You go load for 2 hours and you unload at the end of the show for some easy money, or I could do both. And I decided, I wanted to work the show, so I was no fan of Chuck Berry. I thought Chuck Berry was the guy that was in Back to the Future, the black guy, the guitar guy, the short guy with the baggy suit that did that duck walk, and wasn't very much interested in him at that point because my guitar, my everything I learned about guitar hadn't been to that point yet of blues. I was still the metal guy, But so I go up there and I find out I'm the runner, which you're driving around in your car and you pick people up and you do things. And I was told by Jason McNeil himself, who was United Concerts owner and producer, to go pick up Chuck Berry at this hotel. And back then we didn't have phones in our hands to call people. And I'm like, great, what hotel? And he goes, we don't know. He told me that we don't know. He goes, but we know there's 3 or 4 of them, 3 of them that we think he's at. You got to do this quick. Go get in your car. I go, my car, my 1971 Ford Granada, 4-door with the rust. Yeah. Run down and see, because we got 2 other guys out going to the hotels. So I went to one hotel and he wasn't there. I went to another one and they said, we couldn't tell you if he was here. And I'm like, this ain't going anywhere, So I get in my car and I'm driving back up to Deer Valley to the hillside where the concert's at. And way up in the distance, I see a shadow walking with a guitar case on the left side of the road. And I pull up and it's a black man. And I pull off the shoulder and I'm driving right behind him. I can hear the gravel on the tires crunching. And I stick my head out the window and I go, hey, you Chuck Berry? He turns around with his guitar. He looks at me and goes, fuck you, man. He walks up to my car, walks around opens up the back passenger door and throws his guitar on my back seat, gets in my car, slams the door. He's like looking at my car, cracked window, rust everywhere. And he goes, aha, yeah, I figured, and we're driving and, it's a drive back. I'm driving up there and I'm talking to him and ended up telling him that I was a guitar player and that Eddie Van Halen was my guitar hero. And he asked me how I felt about him. And I told him, I says, I have to be honest. I'm a metalhead, man. I don't know much about you,
Oh.
And he appreciated it.
And how did he react to that?
He just looked at me and goes, well, you're going to find out tonight, and then he's like, by the way, listen, when we get to the set or we get to the show, I don't want you to take me to the dressing room. I need you to do something for me. I go, what's that? He goes, find me a hiding place. He goes, I just blackened my girlfriend's eye back at the hotel room. And I believe the police are going to be coming up possibly to arrest me or to look for me. And I go, well, I didn't know what hotel you were staying at. And this explains a lot of stuff, and he goes, just put me somewhere where it's hard for them to find me. I go, it's not going to be hard once you do your show. He goes, yeah, but they'll let me do my show and then we'll figure it out from there, He had a local band open up, play all his music with him. And I hit him under the stage. The stage was 5-6 feet off the ground, and there was in the center of the stage, I put up a little round drape and a little table.
So you were hiding Chuck Berry underneath the stage because he was deathly afraid that the police were going to come because he punched his girlfriend in the eye.
Right about where the drummer would sit on the stage, underneath, deep, dark under the stage with all the metal. And I took out a couple runners and changed the positions, and I made a little black circle of drapes, and I put a couple little tables and some chairs and took out his suitcase and his guitar and laid it on the table and worked on the guitar for him. And I changed I actually ended up changing all the strings on it. And then I changed a string that had broken on the guitar and I saved them. I still have them to this day.
How did you feel at the time that he had knocked his girlfriend out and you're hiding him and now you're an accessory to the black eye?
He was intimidating. And here's the thing about Chuck Berry that a lot of people don't realize. He's a big, mean guy. He was. I'm 6 foot tall. To me, I don't know if he was wearing disco shoes, but to me, he stood very tall. He was much taller than me. His shoulders were really wide, and he was a mean, gruff, tough guy. He's like, I don't want, I want you to hide me here. Don't fuck me over, this and that. And he was throwing these demands at me, and I did really well with what he requested, and I took it up. And then he sat back in his chair under that stage, and I brought some drinks and things that he required back there. J.C. McNeil comes back, and the guy this is J.C. McNeil, the owner of United Concerts. that done every concert you can remember from like the 60s. And he's pretty much like, okay, thank you. And he leaves, and it's just me and Chuck. And I was asked to be his guitar tech because I had done that a lot being in the union and working these shows because I was a professional guitar player. I would get put, if I wasn't doing a light or load out or load in, I was doing stage hand work in the guitar division, So here I am. He goes, would you check out the guitar, and I put it on and I realized the strings are rusted, Chuck. He goes, yeah, there's some in there. He wasn't prepared for nothing, no amp, just a guitar, one case with a bunch of strings out of the, not in order or anything. I change all the strings on his guitar, and I'm sitting there tuning it up by pushing my ear on the top horn because there's no amp, so I could hear the vibration to tune it. I get it in perfect tune. I stretch the strings all out. I get it in tune, and I lay it on the table and I'm looking at it, and he looks at me and he goes, a lot of people played that guitar. And I go, I bet. He goes, Elvis Presley played that guitar. This is what he's telling me. I go, Elvis played this guitar? He goes, yeah, Elvis Presley played that guitar. John Lennon's played that guitar. I go, really? He goes, yeah. He goes, Paul McCartney's played that guitar. George Harrison's played that guitar. Keith Richards has played that guitar. He named off guitar players that were dead and gone. Jimi Hendrix played that guitar.
Did you feel anything when you were playing it? I mean, with all these legends touching that guitar, was there anything before you knew that when you were holding it? Did it feel different?
Yes, because it was a hollow body Gibson, ES series it was a double cut, it was his main burgundy guitar that it was in his coffin with him at his funeral. It was in the coffin if you look at his funeral pictures. Yeah, I played that guitar, and as I played it, I recognized. All I remember, man, was thinking of him in that baggy suit doing the duck walk. Because here I am, a metalhead, and I'm in my 20s, and I pictured Back to the Future, Michael J. Fox. This is the guitar that was in Back to the Future that they were trying to make it look like. That's what I remember thinking. And then I remember thinking, it's a hollow body. This is exactly the kind of guitar I despise. You can't even play metal on it because it would feed back like crazy. And it was a Gibson. It had a fat neck on it. I was into speed metal guitars then. So, but it was an honor for me to hold it and play it. But see, I didn't know anything about Chuck then, so I didn't know that was his main guitar. I didn't know that's the one he had his whole life. I didn't know any of this.
So in other words, you hold a lot more value in it now.
I had no value in it whatsoever, man. Chuck Berry to me was like Fabian,
Right, but now, looking back in hindsight, you hold a lot more value in it.
3 days later I did, because our steward goes, you never seen, did you ever see Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll? I go, no. What's that? He goes, it's a movie about Chuck Berry, man. Everybody's in the movie. And everybody in that movie is playing that guitar. Paul McCartney, John Lennon. And sure enough, I rented the movie and watched it, and there's the guitar, and there's everybody that was still alive when it was made playing that guitar. And it was amazing. It was the guitar in the movie. It was the guitar that Keith Richards tried to get backstage, and Chuck Berry had knocked Keith Richards out from being an obnoxious fan. It was a guitar he was holding when he did that. It was his iconic cherry guitar that he always played. And I didn't just play it. I changed the strings on it. I adjusted. I did everything I could to it to make it sound sweet. And the band that opened up was a local blues band that happened to know his songs, and they did a beautiful job playing his songs. He broke a string on stage at one time and kind of handed me the guitar real quick, and I'm going through his guitar case trying to find a G string because everything was wound up. I ended up putting the rusty one back on because I couldn't find it. He was totally unprepared, and it wouldn't go back in tune. I hand him the guitar. He's looking at his watch. I was so embarrassed because the crowd's all waiting, and he's standing there tapping his toe, looking at his watch. He comes over and he's pissed off at me. I hand him his guitar. He walks back, and it's so badly out of tune. He tunes it up like they did in the old days, just by ear, tunes it up and goes on with the show, And, I spent a lot of time with him before the show, driving him around, spending time with him. He's nice to me. He knew my name. We talked. But once that show started, I never talked to him or saw him again. I mean, it was like, bam, when that show was over, he was gone. And it wasn't me driving him to wherever he was going. I don't know if it was McNeil himself, but he was in terror of being arrested for assault that show. I know he wasn't arrested on that night at that place, as far as I know, but he was definitely. I was on the lookout for police officers.
So that's one legend. Now, here's the thing. When you were a kid, particularly, you were blown away by both KISS and Eddie Van Halen, and then you ended up working with both of them.
Yeah.
Correct?
You know what happened? Remember I mentioned Ladd Anderson, the country guy he was like 6'8" tall, looked like a lurch. And he was a country singer.
Yes.
Good friend of mine. He's high sonority. So I had done Stevie Wonder. I had done a Tiffany. I hadn't done Van Halen yet, but KISS came, and I was excited about that because I had my memories of KISS, but I was out of that fad at that point. But anyway, I'm like, oh my God, I've never even seen KISS get to play. I never had that blessing. I never had that opportunity as a kid. I wasn't allowed. So here I am, invited to work as a load-in and a load-out for the show. And so Ladd tells me, come at this time and I'll get you your pass. And I said, because I get a laminate pass. So I come in, and I'd already worked a couple shows, and I'd worked modern display, so I knew how to get into the arena through the backside. So I come in through the show, and there's barricades, and this KISS thing is with all the covers and stuff are all, this is after the load in, and it was like a break time. I come back to get my backstage pass, and Ladd is standing in when you see someone you idolize and it's like a shock, when you see him in the color in life, well, I'm coming for, back in, but I didn't have the right pass for my loadout. I had taken that pass off and I walked in. I walk up to Ladd because I know Ladd. I go, hey, Ladd, and I stick my hand out at Gene, and I go, Gene, like a young kid, but here I'm 23 or something. I'm like, Gene, and stick my hand out, and he goes, how'd you get back here? And I turn around and I look at the barricade and I point and I go, right through there. And he goes, you know what I mean? Just like that. He thought I was trying to be a smart ass. He's like, he wanted to know how I got into the arena because he saw me walk up without a pass, without a laminate pass on.
So he didn't realize you were a gun for hire.
No, he's standing there with Ladd Anderson and this, and I got the hair and stuff, and I walk up and I duck under the thing and I walk right up to Ladd and him, and I walk up and I see Ladd, and Ladd knows me, but I look at Gene and I'm like, Gene, how are you? How'd you get back here? And before I could say, I look at him like, right back there under the barricade right there, and he looked at me and goes, you know what I mean? He thought I was being a smart ass. Like, how did I get back there? Oh, I walked in these right here. Anyway, Ladd goes, no, he's okay. He's with the crew. And Gene looks at me and goes, oh. And then Ladd handed me my pass, and I put it on right in front of Gene, and I stuck my hand out, and I go, Gene, it's so great to meet you. Right before he stuck his hand out, and then he slapped my hand out of his way and goes, I got to play tonight. And that's how I met my hero.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And that's the thing. You got to be, sometimes you'll have encounters that are fantastic with your heroes, and sometimes you're going to meet Gene Simmons on the wrong night.
He was having a hell of a conversation with Ladd. Ladd didn't give a shit who he was. Ladd was a country singer, and he was 20 years older than us. He just standing talking to Gene Simmons. I don't even know. He probably knew it was Gene, but I walk in and interrupt their conversation and duck under a thing, and Gene is in control of everything, especially security. And he wanted to know how a fan got into the arena and up to him. That was very important to him, to stop his conversation with Ladd and ask me, how'd you get back here? And I didn't know what to say. I just said, I walked right through there under that barricade. And he took that as me being a smartass to him. Instead, I should have said, I was freaked out. Instead, I should have said, oh, I'm with the show and I'm doing the loadout, and then Ladd would vouch for me and it would have been great. But he thought I was being a smartass to him with that comment. And he pushed my hand away and says, I got to play tonight. And then he looked at Ladd and says, I'll catch up with you later, and walked away. And Ladd looked at me and shook his head and goes, wow, that guy's an asshole. And that's how I met Gene Simmons the first time.
I mean, okay, now you could see it as that, and yes, he was being a little abrasive, but can you imagine being Gene Simmons traveling the world with millions of obsessive fans? Like, look, I was on TV for a blip, and I know what it's like to have a couple of obsessive fans. Imagine being Gene Simmons. KISS took over the world, and you
had to be horrible. And you know what?
It must have been terrifying.
But you know, Gene was a nice guy because to his fans, because there were some kids that had backstage passes that couldn't get on that side of it, but they were on the arena side that Ace Frehley would play on, and they were up against the railing, and Gene Simmons walked over and was shaking their hands and talking to them like he was their father, like, "Oh, hi guys," right after he told me off. That's where he walked to. Right after he told me that, he walked up to some fans and was just beautiful to them.
Was it possible, Jeff, let me ask you this question. Was it possible you were being a wise guy to Gene Simmons?
No, I actually
okay, I'll accept.
I actually was in such awe of standing in front of Gene Simmons and seeing him. And when he spoke to me and I recognized his voice and I stuck my hand out, I didn't know what to say. He asked me how I got backstage, and I said right through there, and I pointed, and that's how I really seriously was telling him that's how I got back here. And he took that as me being a smart ass.
Yeah, well,
and then he was very rude to me and slapped my hand away from him and says, "I got to play tonight." And that's my.
Do you feel like that kind of, did that crush you? You know, being that you had such an impression from KISS when you were a kid, did that?
You know, wow. I look at Ladd like later on, Ladd would always tell me stories. Another guy, hey, you know, years later when we're working, you should have seen Jeff when that happened, when Gene said, look like someone stole his puppy dog, you know? It looked like he stole my puppy dog. Broke my heart, man. So yeah, you know.
Well, some people don't realize how. I guess I guess his reaction to you, he didn't take into consideration that you were an enormous fan, or maybe he didn't care, or maybe he was just scared.
He didn't care. His security, his system, he wanted to go to whoever let me backstage and raise some hell as an executive of his company. He wanted to find out why the rule was broken. Some fan got backstage. That was all he was interested in. And when he found out I worked for the local and I didn't have my pass stuck on me yet, I was going to get it from Ladd, and he thought I was being a smartass and I was working the show. I pissed him off, you know. But then I worked many shows with KISS, and he was great. He was awesome.
So you ran into him again after that?
Many times. Yeah, I worked every KISS show after that. It never came to
and you ended up having a pretty good working relationship.
Yeah, I assistant guitar tech for Paul Stanley.
And how was Paul Stanley? Was he
very quiet? Yeah, very quiet, and he never makes too much eye contact with anybody. If you know, he was very quiet and not around a whole lot. But I worked for his guitar tech. We unloaded, you know, did load in. Then I worked with the guitar tech. We unloaded the cases. A case came in full of guitars, and they were still in the Guitar Center boxes. They weren't even in cases, and they were cheap Japanese copies. And the guitar tech, we had already tuned up all the guitars. From that tour, you know, the one that looked like it was like an army guitar with the camouflage and it looked like an army helmet or a Jeep with the green, and that was his guitar then. And then his famous Ibanez's and all that. I'd taken those all out of the cases and handed them over and helped them cut strings off and, you know, unwind strings and hand them things. And I was fortunate enough to change strings on a few guitars that weren't of fame, probably, you know, lesser guitars.
So I figured we'd take a little break and let the audience hear what Jeff's band sounded like in the 80s. This is Bad Boys with the song More Than She Can Handle. Now, and this particular time that you're referring to was 86-ish onward, correct? And in that time period, or just a little bit after, you started opening, your band was opening for other famous bands, correct?
No one as big as KISS, because KISS never actually got to open up for Ace Frehley in Salt Lake. But Ace was playing by himself. Peter Criss also. Peter Criss came to Rafters nightclub in Salt Lake City. My drummer drove him in a rusty car to the airport.
And what would you say the biggest band that you opened up for?
This is my drummer again, that we listened to Black Sabbath and KISS, and here he is. He didn't care. He didn't have no stardom thing with anybody. But me, it was like.
And what would you say? What would you say the biggest band that you and your band opened up for was?
REO Speedwagon. Let me think. REO Speedwagon, Peter Frampton, Foreigner. We never did open for Styx because that would have been a cool story to tell them about, in the Heights. So many. Edgar Winter, Guitar Heroes. Open up for Yngwie Malmsteen. Being a guitar player, that was phenomenal.
So wait a second, Jeff. Wouldn't you say your band and you as a guitar player opening up for these big shows was making it?
I opened up for Greg Howe, one of the greatest guitar players of all times. Many people. I mean, it would go on forever. There was bands that were signed that were really big on MTV at the time, like Slaughter, Firehouse, 9 Inch Nails, Sabotage. Bands of that caliber were coming through. It's hard for me to remember from the late 80s, early 90s, all the,
Sure. Well, you were an opening band for the bands that you just named, and you had all those.
We opened for a band called Sweet twice, and they were huge influences on KISS and a lot of other bands. The Ballroom Blitz band, Sweet.
Right. So what I'm getting at is you did make it. Your band opened up in concerts, in venues full of people, played in front of those people, and opened up for these other bands that were fantastic.
But usually 1,500 to 2,000 people in a crowded club scene. Yeah, it would have been like Motley Crue crowd.
So what was at that time? What was your definition of making it?
Getting an album, signed, doing an album and getting signed. Now we did 2 Bad Boys albums and they were great. Ronnie Montrose helped in the studio, recording engineer helped with Gilbert Rodriguez, our bass player, on some of that. I replaced a really good guitar player named Chris Clary, who was a phenomenal guitar god. I mean, he wasn't famous, but he was as good as the famous ones. Went to New York to do things and invent pedals and sound equipment for guitars. So, I got to step in for a great band that had a great guitar player, and they liked my stage presence and my rhythm playing. So I wasn't the lead guitar player of Bad Boys. I was in the Hoods. That was my band that, when I went to LA a bunch of different times and played the clubs on different occasions, different years, Bad Boys did really good. A lot of the guys are gone now, some of the guys were quite a bit older than me,
but you still had that incredible experience. You toured with famous bands. You played on stage in front of an audience. You had a band yourself. You lived your dream as a guitar player and as a rock musician.
Well, let me tell you, back with Paul Stanley there, when I was backstage working on the guitars, I was going to tell you, he didn't come around much, But the guitar tech tells me, open up this Anvil case over there. I open it up, it's a bunch of boxed guitars, Japanese guitars. And I pulled out like 6 different guitars, put them in a vise on the stand backstage backwards, and cut the necks with hacksaws halfway through. And I'm sawing on this guitar. So my encounter with Paul Stanley, the guy that got me into music, the first member of KISS, the band that put my head into music. I'm standing there with a saw cutting the back of a guitar neck, and I'm halfway through, and there's a tap on my shoulder. I turn around, it's Paul Stanley. He goes, cut that fucker more than halfway through. I almost knocked my teeth out last night. Yeah, I was cutting. I couldn't, I knew what I was doing because the guitar tech, and the guitar tech had already told me this, I was putting a relief in the back of these Gibsons for Paul Stanley that were made by a guitar factory for cheap and sent to KISS as an endorsement for him to break on stage and throw out into the fans. The very guitar when I was a kid that I just got done telling you the story about, when I found in the dumpster with the broken neck that I hung on my guitar wall, sat and stared at and dreamed at for all my kid years. Man, I want that guitar that Paul Stanley just broke and threw into the crowd, you know? Man, I would love to have that guitar. Why does he break those nice guitars? But I would love to have one. Lo and behold, you know, many years later, I'm the guy taking them out of the box and prepping them up and cutting the necks so that they would break easily for him when he pounded them on the stage.
So a lot of people don't know that, Jeff. A lot of people don't know that they're scored and ready to be broken.
Yes, the people that got the guitars, that took them home, they're not woodworkers, but someone that along the line looked at it goes, oh, look, this has been halfway cut through. But yeah, I'd cut halfway through and then he would break it so that when the fretboard broke off and the truss rod would bend, the body would fly off the guitar, but the strings would still hold it together. But you would see the busted and twisted wood from the fretboard. But the structure of the neck is like a baseball bat made out of maple. You take a guitar and hit it on the ground, shit's going to come up in your face, or it's like hitting the floor with a baseball bat, you know? And he had done this every show for just like the fire trick. He'd break these guitars and so. So yeah, I was cutting up a guitar for that show and probably 6 or 7 other shows down the road. I was prepping those guitars to be broken and thrown out into the crowd to the very people that were just exactly like I was back then. So that went full circle. You see what I mean? How that worked? You know, a dream come true. I didn't get the guitar.
I mean, do you believe in a grand design?
I just remember staring at them albums and like they were gods and just being so wrapped up. It was my savior. It was my oxygen then in the situation I was in with the abuse and the fighting in the family situations. And it took me to a different place, that band. And here I was all of a sudden in that world with that stage and that sign and that logo and that, and them around me talking to me, telling me make sure I cut the guitar neck so it doesn't hurt them. You know, him feigning off the side of the stage and falling and cutting his arm on the railing on his stage, on the side of the stage that he would play on, trying to get off where Ace would play, because he was feigning, running up the stairs because his tech had a guitar around him and holding him up. And then him falling and cutting his arm. I couldn't hold up his whole weight. And he gouged his arm. I always wore black sweats on set. And you might have known that on the movie set that we did. But I like to wear a lot of black sweats sometimes because they get dirty and you don't see the dirt. And so I was a guy in black sweats because you wouldn't see me up in the lights. And here is this guy in this sweatsuit on the side of the stage holding Paul Stanley passed out. Then the guitar tech takes the guitar off and throws it on the ground and runs up and grabs the other side of him. We try and stand him up. He's not standing up. He sits back down. He lays across his roadie's leg. I got blood all over my arm and on the side of my sweats, you know. And I go, did he hit his head? And they go, no, he's out of oxygen. This happened a couple shows ago. And he goes, you got to get oxygen. You got to get oxygen. I go, so I ran down. I go, where am I going to get oxygen? They said the Utah Jazz's locker room's right there, right down the hallway there. Go down with security. And I grabbed security and with all my might ran down and grabbed a security thing on wheels, and then the damn thing broke. I had to carry this huge oxygen tank over my shoulder with a mask on it. And then I get that.
Think about that. Think about how many kids were blown away by KISS, and you are one of the only ones, period, that was in a situation like that with one of your rock heroes.
Yeah, a big hero. You know, I get back with the oxygen mask, and the show, Gene Simmons does a bass solo to cover up this incident. And the crowd's into it. They don't know what's going on. Me and the guitar tech and maybe 2 other guys backstage. Gene Simmons knows what's going on. The drummer doesn't know what's going on. You know, the guitar player, whoever Vinnie Vincent or what, he doesn't really know what's going on. He knows that Paul Stanley is having an episode, you know, and he was having lung trouble is what it was. And we had him off to the side of the stage, still up on the ladder up there. And I crawl up with that tank and put the mask on his face, and his head is right into my shoulder. I got blood all over my arm, and I got KISS blood on me. And as I'm putting the mask on his face and holding it on his face, I go back into the magazines that I so badly wanted that were printed in blood. And I know you remember that. They put out a magazine, a comic book, a KISS comic book, a special edition. And they poured vats. They all took out a pint of blood out of their bodies on camera and put him into the ink vat. But here it is, almost 10 years later, and I got his head on me. His body is on me in his guitar tech, and his head is over almost into my lap, and I'm holding him. And I got blood going down my arm from his cut. And I'm looking at him. I put the mask on, and he starts to, he's breathing now, and he sits up, and he's got blood all over his hands. And he looks at me like with his hands open, like, where do I, there's metal. And I just put my arm out, and I said, right here. So he wiped both his hands on my shirt. And I looked at him, and I was so close to him while Gene's doing his bass. And I go, I guess that's better than the comic book. And I said that to him. And he just looked at me. He didn't really know what I meant, but I just looked at me, put this blood on my shirt, and I go, I guess that's better than the comic book. Unfortunately, it was a black sweats. So I would show people, and I'd have to move the light around, go, look, there's Paul Stanley's blood, But Gene's on the side of the stage just playing.
I have to know, did Paul Stanley get back on stage that night?
Gene Simmons, I swear, he probably did a 15 to 20 minute bass solo. And if there's any news article or footage anywhere it's left in the world somewhere on that show in Salt Lake City for Vinnie Vincent in that tour, they might mention that there was an awful long bass solo. But Gene would do his bass solo, and then he'd walk over like it was his wife or his girlfriend with the look of fear, like his eyes were horrified. He didn't know if Paul McCartney was having a heart attack. He didn't know what was going on. These guys are, older now, and then he's like, okay. And then Paul Stanley stood up, had his oxygen, went back out, and they did they went on with the show, and they cut it early though. They did cut the show early, because I didn't get to hear a couple of the songs I really wanted to hear. And Paul Stanley really didn't have the energetic show that he really did after that. But yeah, he had an episode of some kind of lung problem where he couldn't breathe. And he went unconscious and almost fell down a flight of metal stairs with me and his guitar tech there to hold him up and help him with that. And so that was cool, And Gene was very nice to me. He wasn't like, he didn't know that 2 or 3 years earlier at a show, I was the smart ass that he thought I was. He was just very nice. Hey man, thanks, good job tonight. Thank you so much. Paul Stanley patting me on the back.
So that must have redeemed everything for you. You had you essentially saved one of your heroes, helped save him.
Yeah.
How did you feel?
I felt great. And then when he broke that guitar, it almost broke before it hit the ground. I remember thinking, I went a little too far because it broke so easy,
Did you ever, okay, so I have to ask you this because we're getting into the last quarter of this interview, and this is fascinating to me. So you have all these desires, this true love for that music, for KISS as a kid, for Van Halen as a kid, and then you have this horrible encounter with this freak agent who you're kind of like, you turn your back on that world, but you come back to it. Let me ask you this. You come back to it and you get these profound experiences. You get to open up for bands. You are still a musician. Your band is formed. And then you get to assist some of your heroes. You're literally holding your hero in your arms and helping him survive at a concert. I mean, in a way, okay, for a guy who didn't give a damn about selling his soul, you got something much better for those experiences, in my opinion. I need to know, before we close this whole thing up, I need to hear the Eddie Van Halen story. And so if you can tell me how you met your other hero.
After, 1979, Jamie's Crying's on the radio. I told you I heard this amazing siren, and I heard this album that changed my life. At that point, Eddie Van Halen was in my head 24/7. Because all I did was think about guitar, music, making it, Eddie Van Halen. and how cool David Lee Roth was and how badly I wanted to be in that kind of band that brought that kind of vibe. The feeling was like I had been there before, and Eddie Van Halen was in my place, and I thought, this is me. And I wanted to be Eddie Van Halen more than anything in the world, man. It was guitar magazines would come out. I would go to 7-Eleven, walk there just to get the Guitar Player magazine because he was on every cover. And so what happens is I go to Salt Lake City with my band. We're going to LA. We're going to make it, you know. We're in 2 cars, a Riviera and an Impala. We go to Salt Lake, we break down, we meet girls, and we're homeless. We're living in our cars. But we have beautiful girlfriends, and they let us use their showers. And one day we're drinking beer, and Ellie, oh, this sweet girl, Ellie, she goes, hey, you guys going to see Van Halen? And I go, what do you mean? What? She goes, yeah, they're coming. They're coming, man. They're like in 2 weeks, they're coming. Well, we were living in a car. We weren't even eating. We were selling blood plasma. I almost died, man, because they took plasma out of me, and I went into a coma. Yeah, I called paramedics and shit because I hadn't eaten in 2 days. We were staying at the Stratford Hotel for like $4 a night and giving blood, and then going sit in SOS temporary services with a bunch of winos and drunks for hours and hours to go cut mold off of cheese in a factory for $3 an hour so we could eat, you know, or have a pack of cigarettes at that point. Anyway, Van Halen's coming, man. Yeah. The 2 other guys, Lance, he wasn't of any kind of fame, he didn't care. Oh, I don't want to go see them if I have to, you know, we're going to go dig ditches for temporary service, SOS temporary service up in the mountains, install sprinklers for a couple of days so we can buy Van Halen tickets. So it was me and Robin, my bass player, that had the incentive to want it that bad that we went and dug trenches in bedrock. We had blisters on our hands. We had blisters on our blisters. It was that kind where you couldn't even bend your fingers, you know. And we get our money, and we get the worst tickets you could ever imagine. With the back of the arena, man, was like the brick wall was behind our seat. You know what I mean? And I'm on Eddie's side of the stage, so I'm blessed. Van Halen comes out, and for the first time in my life, there he is. And Robin was just not quite as excited, but he followed me pretty much. And I'm like, look, there the man is. There he stands. There's the guy. Look. And at this point, he wants to be a bass player, you know. And we were teaching him, and we were a rock band, a young rock band, getting pretty good, as a matter of fact. But so we go to the concert, and then we didn't have the same tickets as our girlfriends because they had bought theirs much earlier, and they had like 3rd row or something, stage left. And they were pretty girls, and they all got backstage passes. So as soon as the show was over, when we go backstage, they're backstage getting in the limos and going with the band and the roadies. And they look at us and you're going to have to meet us at home. We don't have a ride. You know, Robin goes, well, where are you going? We're going over to the Hotel Utah, you know. So we knew where the band was staying. So we walked to the Hotel Utah, and we get there, and we're there for hours and hours, and there's no sign of Van Halen. It gets to be like an apocalyptic type of situation. No cars, no traffic, no noise, but the Hotel Utah. And then this brown leather bus pulls up, you know, that's fully covered in leather, real nice bus. And another one pulls on the other entrance. And I'm standing with my friend Robin, and right out of the blue, after hours of standing with only one person, and she was like stoned out of her mind looking up at the sky, you know, like on some kind of trip. Eddie Van Halen came out of a side door and went up to his bus, and we run up behind him, and he's trying to get a key into the door, and he's kicking the door, and he's swearing and cussing, fuck, son of a bitch, you know, that kind of stuff, kicking the door. We walk up behind him. There's a temple behind us. It's dark, and I yell at Eddie. I fucking scared the piss out of him. He jumps and turns around, and he's like, what the fuck do you want? Like that, looks at, you know, I'm just freaked out, man. It was Eddie, you know. I'm right behind him, and I'm not even 6 foot yet, man, because I'm a young kid still. I'm like, Eddie, you know, 1981. He turns around, what the fuck do you want? I'm like, oh, he scared the piss out of us, man. The way he reacted, he really scared him and pissed him off. And he was like, what the fuck do you guys want, man? 2 o'clock in the fucking morning. What crazy son of a bitches, you know? Excuse my language. But I just stand there, stood staring at him. And he looks at me, and then he kind of shifts his weight onto another foot. And I'm putting my hand up real slow, kind of like I did with Gene. And he looks at me, and then his eyes change, and he goes, "You guys want anything, man? An autograph? What?" And, you know, Robin goes, "No, man, we dug ditches for 2 days to get tickets. Look." And he shows him his hand, his mouth, you know, and he's like, "Oh, fuck." And then he tries to shake his hand, and Eddie didn't want to touch his hand. He's, "No, that's okay."
Blisters all over
goes,
it.
"Oh, God." He goes, and then my hand's going up slowly, and then he takes my hand, and I take my left hand, and I got both of his hands in my hand like he's like the Messiah. You know, I'm holding his hand in both of my hands, and I won't let it go, and I'm just staring at him. He goes, "Yeah, is there anything else you want? You okay?" I'm like, just staring at him. I'm like, "No, man. You know, I love you, man." You know, like that kind of thing. He's like, okay, yeah, give me my hand back. He didn't say that, but he's kind of gets his hand back, and then he looks at his hand because my hand was totally blistered. He knew he knew what we had done to get to that show. You know, so he can't get in the bus, so he runs back into the side of the hotel and disappears. And maybe another 45 minutes goes by. And I'm standing by the bus because I knew he came out that door. And this door is obscure. It's way off to the back. It's like a small door with a little awning over it. And the big, massive doors are up front. So this is like a back entrance type of thing. And all of a sudden, I see a cart coming around the corner with this, must have been 87-year-old man, it looked like. Old as hell, with the red suit on and the gold thing. He had a box and a guitar case on there. A small box with a handle on it, you know, like a typewriter would be in, and a guitar case. And I knew right then and there who that was, because I know from all the magazines I read that he carried his guitar, his baby, wherever he went, with a box of hand tools and parts, because he was always tricking his guitars out, you know. And he never left the Frankenstein. Even if he didn't play it that night, he wouldn't have left it. You know?
And the Frankenstein guitar was that famous red guitar with all the different stripes on it.
It's the one on the first album that's black and white, with the fire coming off of it. It's the one.
Okay, all right. Which one was the red and white one with all the different?
It's that one.
It looked like it was taped.
It is that one.
It's okay. It's the one I'm thinking.
Later on, he did the second album. The guitar wasn't on that second album. He had another guitar that got buried with a dime bag. But the third album, he did all his albums with that guitar until the 5150 guitar. But he taped it up and painted it red after the third tour because people were copying him too much, his guitar look. So he totally jacked it up with red spray paint. And he had just painted it probably weeks before that show because I'd never seen it that color, you know. So anyway, it comes out and this old man puts the guitar, comes outside onto this red carpet under this red awning, and he puts the stuff down on the ground, like, because the bus is there, and he turns around and goes back in with the cart, and he's halfway down the hallway. Well, I saw Eddie come out following him at first. Eddie was behind him, but then Eddie turned around and ran back, and the old dude came out and he put the stuff down on the sidewalk, and he walked back in, and Eddie was gone. And the guitar in the box sat. There's 3 people within any view in the bus. 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that, you know. And is my Robin, he goes, "Can you believe this? That, you know what that is?" I go, "Yeah, that's gotta be, that's the Frankie." He goes, "You know, you could steal it, man. You could steal the guitar. There's nobody around." And I just stood there. So I walked up to it and I put my leg up against it and I bent down and I picked it up. It's a guitar, all right. You know, I can fill it in there. And Robin picks up the case. I go, "No, man, I'm just going to hold it." You know, no sooner than that, I see Eddie running around the corner with big eyes like saucers. This guy come back without his guitar, right? Maybe Eddie thought the guy was going to wait for him in the hallway or whatever, but Eddie realized whatever he forgot, that guy went out and put his shit on the curb. Most people taxi or something like that. And yeah, I could have stole the Frankenstein that night. 100%. It was it.
But you wouldn't have. No. You wouldn't have stolen that guitar from him.
It was in my hands. I had it, and I could have walked away with it.
But think about this. So, I mean, and I'm sure you have, but, you know, from my perspective, listening to this, it seems like you achieved everything your heart really desired. And maybe you didn't notice certain things along the way. It seems more divine from your beginning, where you idolized these musicians. I'm talking about an extremely rare and small percentile of people that ended up in the situation that you did, where you got close to these people on several occasions throughout your life.
I feel that I felt that people are destined for their destiny to make it or not, even before they try. But you have to try to at least. But you have to try. There's people that didn't make it that were destined to make it, but they didn't because they didn't try. They didn't put the effort out. And I believe I was one of those that was not supposed to make it, but I was blessed enough to be able to get through.
I don't buy that, Jeff. I don't buy that you didn't make it. It's just, and I think maybe that is your only real flaw, is that you don't recognize what I'm seeing here in this timeline. What I'm seeing here is somebody that did make it. Making it isn't dying of a drug overdose on a tour bus. Making it is you lived out your dream, and you still are. Look, next week you could go score a movie, you could make a blues album, you could do whatever, and that could be a big hit. You're still alive. And so what I'm saying is this life isn't fully written yet. And so far what I'm hearing is that you did make it. You just turned your back on maybe some ways of making it that may not have been right for you, or for anyone else for that matter.
The timing wasn't right. I had a decision to make, a choice. Was it my wife and my dog, or was it this career style? What I was seeing with the heroin use and the filth and what I saw people that I looked up to, how they really were, and what you had to do to actually pay the fee to get into the door, and literally pay to play. And I saw the horror of it. It's a nightmare. And I decided, no, I'm not going to do this. And I went back home, and I was like Eddie, because Eddie never did any of that. He never tried. Eddie didn't want to be famous. He didn't want to make it. He wanted to play music and record. And the fame never was with him. He never cared for it. And it was a black mark on him his whole life. He didn't like being recognized or being called out or being treated special. And he had dark demons. He was very, very troubled man. And he had a real dark side. Yeah, he could be very mean, which he had been to me a few times. I'd been screamed at by him.
Okay, so what the audience hasn't heard yet is, because you first were encountered, during that time of a concert as a kid, you ended up encountering him again in your professional life.
It was just like that night when he ended up thanking me for saving his guitar from being stolen and let me open up the case and take it out and play it right on the sidewalk in front of him. That's how it was. He was nice. He was smoking a cigarette, looking at me with that grin. And I couldn't play worth a shit. It was embarrassing.
So many years later, he passes away, and it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah. Eddie Van Halen was a very moody person. Like that time was, he yelled at me twice, and then he was very kind to me and put on a grin. The second show I worked, he comes in and walks past me, and I wave at him. I go, "Hey, Eddie." And he looked at me and goes, "Hey, what?" And then he kept walking. And then later on, he came back and patted me on the shoulder when I wasn't looking and kept walking. And then I worked with a guitar tech, and he come in, and he was very nice and smiley at me. It was, it's like 1 minute, "Hey, what?" And then another show I did, he comes in, and I had it was a friend of mine that I used to date, and she was notorious for working Salt Palace security. Her name was Leslie, and she was very well trusted, and she was working backstage. She always did the backstage area for laminates, and Eddie come in without his laminate and tried to get backstage, and she physically held him and wouldn't let him back. And I walk up, I'm like, "Leslie, that's Eddie Van Halen."
And she didn't realize who he was?
She wasn't sure. She'd done basketball. She'd done everything country. She was an older lady. She really didn't know. But her response was priceless. Eddie's just being an ass to everybody, and he tries to get back at his own concert, and she goes, "Ho, where's your pass?" "But I'm Eddie." She goes, "Eddie who?" "I'm Eddie Van Halen." I look at her and I go, "Leslie, that's Eddie Van Halen." And she goes, "Oh, it is? Well, I have it. I have written directions from Eddie Van Halen not to let anybody back here that doesn't have a laminate pass on." And Eddie goes, "Good job" to her. And she wouldn't let him back. And I finally looked, I said, "Leslie, it's Eddie Van Halen." And she let him back. And then when he came out, he walked up to me and Robin, my bass player, the same guys that met him on that night. Years later, we're both working the union then. And he comes up and he, "Thanks, man."
And did you think, do you think he had any recollection whatsoever of that night many years ago, previous?
Oh, the
when you first encountered him, did he remember you?
I believe that he possibly, even to this day, would remember the time that the Frankenstrat was left outside on a sidewalk in a city he wasn't even familiar with, Salt Lake City, just left out on a sidewalk. For like 6 minutes, just left on the carpet under a side door, just left there. And this is the most iconic guitar, one of the top 3 iconic guitars in the world, priceless. And yeah, I could have stolen it. I literally could have stolen it. And so I think to this day, he would, if that was brought up, there was probably other times that were close calls, airports and things, but he might have actually remembered that,
Sure. So coming full circle in this journey, you began with music, bringing you out of hard times. And it seems that music really helped you out of hard times throughout the entire journey, especially when there were moments where you could have, essentially sold your soul. You didn't do it, no matter what. It seemed like you just refused to go in that direction naturally. And that's what's protected you, because you never know, man, you might not even be here. You could have completely sold your soul. You could have, ended up with a heroin habit. You could have killed yourself. You could have, who knows, done a million things that you didn't want to do, and would have been, what Henry Winkler told you about the homeless man playing guitar. He's probably happier than anybody, right? I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but so how do you feel looking back in hindsight at a life? How do you feel looking back in hindsight at your life now?
I believe I was a happier person than Eddie Van Halen for most of it. And most of the years of my life and most of the years of Eddie's, I was probably happier than him most of the time than he was, even with his fame and fortune and his good son, which was the light of his life. And, to end this, I want to tell you something that happened, and I haven't told anyone this. And it's very, very hard for me to explain it. But I looked up to Eddie like the big brother I never had. I'd met him a few times, and he told me a few things in life. At one time he told me, "Just play, man. Be you. You don't need stripes on your guitar." When I was backstage, and I was like, "Man, I wish I was you. I wish I would have thought of that. How'd you come up with that idea? I wish I would." Hey, just play. Be you, man. Not me. Play. That's what he told me. That's the advice I got from Eddie. And he wanted me to always play and be me and do your own thing. Those are the things, whenever I had the chance to talk to him, that he told me. Other times he was either drunk or unapproachable. But spiritually, I always thought of him as he had a magic on me with his touch of guitar. And his influence was unbelievable. And right at the end of my band, I got kicked out of a band called Craigslist Killers. We call ourselves the Killers, but it was Craigslist Killers, believe it or not. And we were getting popular, but I ended up developing a trigger finger in my middle finger on my left hand. And it got so bad that I would go before gigs and get injections, and to the point where my doctor says, this went on for like 2 years, and he would give me these big, huge needles he would stick into my finger, into the palm of my hand, deep into the tendon and into the whatever was the problem there. He dug this needle in. It looked like it went in like an inch, and he'd put this cortisone into my finger. And a couple days, the shot would make me have to go to the bathroom. It was that bad. It hurt, and then a couple days later, the finger was okay. And then I could sneak playing. And then, 3-4 weeks later, the finger would stick again. It got so bad that I'd wake up in the middle of the night yelling at my girlfriend, "Help me," because my finger in my sleep, the fingernail on my middle finger on my left hand would go all the way back to my wrist. It would twist in like like a cramp in your foot, and it would lock, and I could not break it free. And it felt like my finger was being tore off. So I would soak it under hot water, put ice on it, sit up for a half hour, and then bend it, and then I would put the pressure on it, and then it would click, and even my girlfriend would jump because it made that noise, and it was so painful. Then I put my finger in a splint. I go back to the doctor, and he goes, "Okay, I've already told you this is unfixable. You need surgery. This is totally inflamed around the sheath. It's been like this for 2 years. It's damaged, and this is your 8th cortisone shot. I'm only supposed to give you 3." So I had this surgery lined up, and then I canceled it one time because we had a really big gig that I didn't want to miss, and I had it set up for surgery. Now I'm going to tell you, and my girlfriend understands this. My finger hurt so bad, and I was so brokenhearted about my finger, and I was back in the band, and we were doing some cool shit right before COVID, that I actually considered suicide. That's how bad I was feeling about my life at that time and my finger. My finger was unusable. I couldn't even use my hand at work. It hurt so bad. And now they're going to cut it open, and I'm just not feeling good about this. And if I can't play guitar, I don't want to live. I think Eddie might have felt a little bit of that. I don't think I would have ever killed myself, but I thought about not wanting to live. That's how bad I felt. I got in that last shot. I got to the point where I could hardly play guitar anymore. And I got really frustrated and drank a little too much, and I offended my bass player's brother really bad on Facebook and got kicked out of the band. So now I'm really bummed out. I wake up for work, my finger's locked, okay? Again, and I'm just, okay, I'm going to do surgery. I'm going to call the doctor. I'm going to do this for sure. I'm going through with this, you know. I was going to call my insurance guy because I was told to call my insurance, make sure this was covered. So I go to the coffee house to call and set up, make sure my insurance is going to cover it. And the first thing I see on my phone is from Wolfgang Van Halen. Unfortunately, my father, Eddie Van Halen, has passed away, you know. Hit me like a brick in the right. I mean, like someone smacked me in the face, you know. I mean, Eddie, I knew he had cancer, but he was beating it for 20 years. I didn't know he was that bad. No one knew it. And I get this in the morning and my finger's locked, and I came back and I'm sitting there and I'm going to call and get this fucking surgery. And it comes across on my Facebook. Not because I was a fan. It came across everybody's Facebook. Eddie Van Halen has passed away, you know, just like a few hours before, you know, and I sat there in shock. I forgot all about my appointment, my doctor, and I sat there and I drank my coffee in the coffee house, and I literally got choked. I just turned my Facebook off, and then my phone started beeping because a lot of people know how much of a fan I am of Eddie's, that knew that he passed. Did you hear? Did you hear? Click, click, click. I wouldn't even answer my phone, you know. And I went home. I just left the coffee house. I went home and I went in my apartment, and I never played anymore because my finger hurt too bad. But I sat and I just put my hands in my face in my hands and cried. I just cried, man. And mostly for Wolfie, his son. I just cried my eyes out for him losing his father, and Eddie going at such a young age to such a horrible disease, and that my guitar hero was gone, and I just felt so horrendously lost. I went in my room and I looked on the wall. I had the Frankenstrat that I had built years before hanging on the wall, and I took it off the wall. It had dust all over it, and I pulled my cord out and I plugged it in, and I sat down where I'd just been bawling my eyes out with my little practice amp that was under the table, and I crank it up and I'm just sitting there looking at the guitar, thinking about Eddie and about that time that, you know, I held it on my lap like I did Eddie's back in 81, the same guitar that I had replicated. And I just picked that fucker up and started playing my heart out like never before. Like never before, Christopher. Okay? I played, there was goosebumps going up and down my back and on my neck. Tears are coming down my face. I played better than I ever did before. And excuse me if I get emotional.
It's okay.
I was doing things on the guitar, and they were all Eddie's riffs, all his magic that I'd learned or tried to learn over the years that became crystal clear to me, and I played them, and it sounded fantastic. The guitar sounded fantastic. I didn't even tune the guitar. I hadn't played it in a long time. I couldn't. And I'm jamming and I'm playing along and I did eruption note for note, fast, quick. I was doing things that I tried before, like the intro to Mean Street that I always flubbed up, and I played it perfectly and my hands were just doing magic. And I thought, fucking hey, and then it hit me right then and there. I hadn't realized it. My finger was fucking healed, man.
Wow.
My finger was healed, Christopher. You can take I don't know how to explain it. My girlfriend is totally with me. She was there. She believes it. She wasn't there when I was crying when this happened, but she knows what happened, and she is blown away. My doctor was blown away. People close to me were blown away. I'm like, look, not only that, I have arthritis in all my fingers now, except for one. And it's the one that wouldn't work. My finger's never been better. Okay. It's never been better, Chris. And I can play so much better now than I ever have in my life.
What do you think this was?
I think it was me crying out in the name of Eddie Van Halen and the heartbreak of his son, and me being a huge fan of Eddie and a devoted fan, and all the love and light I ever put out his way somehow resonated when he passed away. I had lost my daughter because she was transgender and she disowned me, and we didn't talk. And I was horribly depressed about that. I was in a suicidal type of a thought process. My daughter was gone. That would have killed Eddie. His son was his reason for living. I didn't even have my daughter, let alone a music career anymore or a band to be in. And I honestly believe that as I was playing that guitar and thinking of Eddie and in mourning of him and thinking of his son, I think something happened spiritually that came through me that was Eddie, that let me loose like that and play like that. And here's the part that's the most amazing part of it all. That was October 6, 1981, when I met Eddie Van Halen and played his Frankenstrat. It was October 6, 2021, 40 years to the day that I was playing my Frankenstrat, and that happened to my finger and my ability to play. And so I've told people, many stories, but never this one because it's too out there. It's too unbelievable. It's too outrageous. My girlfriend, I sat and
it's not unbelievable. It's not. It's amazing. It's an amazing story.
I came to my girlfriend's front door and there was tears coming down my face, and she looked at me white and she goes, "I know." She goes, "I know. It'll be okay, Jeff." I go, "No, sit down." And I picked up the guitar I have here and I go, "Look." She goes, she turned white as a ghost. She's even more so than me. She goes, "No, this is impossible." A week later, I went back to my doctor and told him the story. He knows who Eddie Van Halen is. He's 10, 15 years younger than me. He sat there in awe looking at me. He goes, "This is a medical miracle, Jeff. This is absolutely a medical miracle." He goes, "Your finger was toast. It was even more toastier because of all the injections I put in it for you to play. There is no way your finger healed. It's impossible." And I go, "Tell me about it." I wanted to die. He knew it. He knew he was trying to help me because he knew I was almost suicidal over it. I go back every visit and he just looks at me and shakes his head and I go, "Never better. Never better, man."
Amazing.
So with all that being said, I had this really good feeling with Eddie that day, and I knew he was on my shoulder in some sense, in some magical, spiritual way. I shouldn't say magical. His playing was magical, but his spirit was with me that day, and I believe it healed me, and that's my belief to my dying day. I 100% believe that. And it also came back to me what he said. And when I started crying and feeling that, I could hear his voice say, "Just play, man. Just be you. Just play." And my finger was better. So you know what happens now? I play all the time because I'm afraid he's going to punish me if I don't. I play.
I believe
a week goes by and
I believe throughout your entire life so far, because there's a lot more left, that you've had those divine visits and signs that kept you safe too, man. That kept you safe. You didn't sell your soul. And I think the rewards of that are still forthcoming? Like so many of them you've had already, but there are more.
Yes, after the finger healing episode, and I am putting this out there. This is on my dogs' lives, their souls, my daughter. My girlfriend is totally aware of what happened, and she is a believer. Believe me, this happened to me. I was healed exactly when I found out Eddie Van Halen had passed, and I was in a really bad way. And I know that there is an angel on your shoulder at times, and I believe Eddie was my angel. And I do what he told me to do because it came to me. He says, just play, man, just play. And then it came to me. He told me one other thing: be yourself, do your own thing. You don't need stripes. So over the last 2 years since he's died, I've dedicated myself to making my own guitar from scratch for my purpose of how I feel and how I play. And I feel that Eddie's with me on it every step of the way. And I feel that he would appreciate and love the guitar that I'm making. And it's almost done. And I'll send pictures to you of it.
I can't wait to see it, and I believe that wholeheartedly. I believe that your chapters forthcoming are going to be amazing, and better than ever. And so it's like that. I always thought like the perfect life would be that you grow old, you live a great life, you do all the things you ever wanted to do, and by the time when you're there and you're an old man and you close your eyes, or a woman, right? Close your eyes. And you're satisfied with what you did here, and it's time to go. And so that leads me to my last question. And I know you believe there's more to life than just this physical existence. So when we do leave this physical existence, what will you take with you? And there's no wrong or right answer. It's whatever you say is right.
What would I take with me when I leave this world?
Yes.
Wow, man, that's deep. The memories of my grandfather and all my pet dogs I've had, because they're the best thing in my life also. So it would probably be, that's what I take, is the memory of my grandfather who saved me and raised me, his name was also Eddie. Memories of Eddie Van Halen and my dogs, and of course the love of my life, my girlfriend Debbie. The memories, just memories. There's nothing I would take, just memories.
Welcome back to Off to the Witch. I'm your host, Christopher Garitano, and I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Dreams are worth fighting for, and when fame is a potential element, often it comes with temptation, and sometimes a test from the complex clockwork of life. Stay true to your soul, always, and the result will never fail you. Until next time, try to enjoy the daylight.